to my mother.
You're home early. Willa's voice was sharp, caught off guard. I thought your meeting was tomorrow. But Alvin wasn't looking at her. His eyes were locked on his mother. Donna Turner, the woman who raised him, who taught him strength and dignity, was collapsed on the kitchen floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Her yellow dress was soaked and stained with what looked like old food, pasta sauce, gravy, coffee grounds, dripping from her silver hair down her face. Her hands trembled as she tried to wipe her eyes, but she only smeared more filth across her cheeks. When she saw him standing in the doorway, instead of calling out to him like she used to, she froze. Her whole body went rigid. Her red, swollen eyes went wide with something that made Alvin's blood run cold. Fear. His own mother was afraid. That look shattered something deep inside Alvin's chest. He moved quickly, his briefcase hitting the floor with a heavy thud as he dropped to his knees beside her. "Mama," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Mama, what happened to you?" Donna stared at him with those terrified eyes, her lips quivering. She opened her mouth, but no words came out at first. Just a strangled whimper. "Baby." Her voice was so small, so broken. You weren't supposed to be home." "I'm here now," Alvin said, his hands shaking as he reached for her. "I'm here, Mama. It's okay." He gently touched her shoulder, and she flinched like he'd struck her. The movement was instinctive, protective, the reflex of someone who'd been hurt too many times. Alvin's throat tightened. Carefully, so carefully, he wrapped his arms around her frail shoulders. She felt so thin, so fragile, nothing like the strong woman who used to carry him on her back when he was a boy. He could feel her bones through the soaked fabric of her dress. His chest burned with a pain so sharp he could barely breathe. "Alvin, I can explain." Willa's voice changed completely. Suddenly she sounded sweet, reasonable, like a completely different person from the woman who'd been standing over his mother seconds ago. It's about respect, baby. Your mother has been so difficult lately. She spilled food all over the floor on purpose. She's been talking back to me, disrespecting me in my own house. I was only trying to teach her some accountability, the way anyone would handle someone who refuses to follow basic rules. "Shut up." Alvin's voice was so low, so cold. It didn't even sound like his own. He stood slowly, helping his mother to her feet, keeping her close to his side. When he turned to face Willa, his face was a mask of barely controlled rage. "Don't you dare stand there and justify this." His words came out like hammer blows. "Don't you dare act like what I just walked in on was anything but cruelty." Willa's expression shifted. Her eyes went soft. Her bottom lip trembled. Tears, perfectly timed tears, began to slide down her cheeks. She pressed her hands to her chest like she'd been wounded. "But Alvin, you don't understand," she said, her voice breaking. "I've been here alone with her for months while you're always traveling. She needs structure. She needs boundaries. I've been trying so hard to take care of her, to keep this house running, to be a good daughter-in-law. She needs love," Alvin roared, and the force of his voice made Willa take a step back. "She needs dignity. She needs someone who won't humiliate her, who won't dump trash on her head like she's nothing." His mother pressed closer to him, her body still trembling. He could feel her tears soaking through his shirt. "She's my mother, Willa," Alvin said, his voice dropping to something dangerous and quiet. "She raised me. She sacrificed everything for me. And you You did this to her? Willa opened her mouth to respond, but Alvin held up his hand. Don't. Don't say another word. Just get out of my sight. As Willa backed away, her mask of innocence slipping for just a moment to reveal something cold and calculating underneath. Alvin pulled his mother closer and whispered into her hair. I'm so sorry, Mama. I should have been here. I should have protected you. But I swear to you, on everything I am, this ends today. And in that moment, as he held his broken mother in his arms, Alvin Turner made a silent vow. Willa would answer for every bruise, every tear, every moment of terror she'd inflicted. He would make sure of it. Alvin Turner's Mercedes pulled into the driveway at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 days earlier than anyone expected. The business trip to Chicago had been cut short. The client had rescheduled at the last minute. Something about a family emergency. Alvin had been annoyed at first, frustrated by the wasted flight and hotel reservation. But as he sat in the taxi to O'Hare, watching the city blur past his window, he'd felt something unexpected. Relief. Maybe it was a sign. Maybe it was time to stop running himself ragged, to actually spend some time at home for once. He grabbed his leather briefcase from the passenger seat and stepped out of the car, his Italian shoes clicking against the concrete. The afternoon sun was warm on his face, and for a moment, he just stood there, looking at the elegant brownstone he'd purchased 5 years ago. The house represented everything he'd worked for. The late nights, the missed family dinners, the endless conference calls. Success had a price, and he'd paid it willingly. But as he approached the front door, something felt off. The curtains in the living room were drawn shut. That was unusual. His mother loved natural light, always had. She'd open those curtains first thing every morning, letting the sun flood the room while she had her coffee. God's light is free, baby, she used to tell him when he was young. Might as well let it in. Alvin paused at the door, keys in hand. The house was too quiet. No music playing from the kitchen radio, no sound of the television. Just silence, heavy and oppressive, like the house itself was holding its breath. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. The foyer was immaculate, too immaculate. Everything in its place, not a cushion askew, not a magazine out of line. It looked like a showroom, sterile and cold. This wasn't the lived-in warmth his mother usually maintained. She liked things tidy, sure, but she also liked things to feel like home. "Mama?" Alvin called out, setting his briefcase down on the console table. "I'm home early. Where are you?" No answer. He loosened his tie and moved deeper into the house, his unease growing with each step. The living room was empty. The dining room was empty. He checked his mother's bedroom on the first floor, the one they'd set up for her so she wouldn't have to climb stairs. But it was empty too, the bed made with military precision. Then he heard it. A sound so faint he almost missed it. A whimper, small, broken, barely human, coming from the kitchen. Alvin's heart began to pound. He moved quickly down the hallway, his dress shoes silent on the hardwood floor. As he got closer, he heard something else. A voice. Willa's voice. But it wasn't the smooth, careful tone she usually used. This was sharp, venomous, dripping with contempt. "Disgusting, old woman! Look at this mess. You did this on purpose, didn't you?" "Didn't you?" Alvin reached the kitchen doorway and froze. The scene before him didn't make sense at first. His brain couldn't process it, couldn't reconcile what he was seeing with the reality he thought he knew. Willa stood in the center of the kitchen, her body rigid with fury, her face twisted into something ugly and cruel. She was wearing a red dress, the expensive one he'd bought her for their anniversary, and her hair was perfectly styled. She looked like she was dressed for a luncheon or a shopping trip, composed and polished, except for her hands. In her hands, she held a black trash can, and she was tipping it, dumping its contents. Rotting food, coffee grounds, eggshells, congealed grease, moldy bread, directly onto the head of the woman kneeling on the floor. His mother. Donna Turner was on her knees on the kitchen tiles, her hands raised weakly above her head in a futile attempt to shield herself. Her yellow dress, her favorite yellow dress, the one she wore to church, was soaked and filthy. Garbage slid down her silver hair, over her face, pooling around her on the pristine white floor. She was crying, her whole body shaking with sobs, and she was saying something over and over in a voice so small and defeated, it broke Alvin's heart. "I'm sorry, my daughter. I'm sorry. Please stop. Please, I'm sorry." Time seemed to slow down. Alvin saw every detail with crystalline clarity. The tears cutting tracks through the filth on his mother's face, the cruel satisfaction in Willa's eyes, the way his mother's hands trembled, the garbage scattered across the floor like evidence of a crime, and then time snapped back into sharp, brutal focus. "What the hell are you doing?" Alvin's voice came out as a roar, raw and primal. He crossed the kitchen in 3 long strides, moving faster than he'd moved in years. He grabbed the trash can from Willa's hands and hurled it across the room, where it crashed into the wall with a thunderous bang, leaving a dent in the pristine drywall. Willa stumbled backward, her eyes wide with shock. You're home early," she stammered. "I thought your meeting was tomorrow." But Alvin wasn't looking at her. He couldn't. If he looked at her right now, if he let himself focus on what she'd just done, he might do something he'd regret. Instead, his eyes were locked on his mother. Donna was still on the floor, still crying, her whole body curled in on itself like she was trying to disappear. When she saw him, she didn't call out. She didn't reach for him. Instead, her eyes went wide with something that made Alvin's blood turn to ice. Fear. She was afraid. His own mother, the strongest woman he'd ever known, was looking at him with terror in her eyes. "Mama," he whispered, dropping to his knees beside her. The garbage squelched under his pants, soaking through the expensive fabric, but he didn't care. "Mama, what happened to you?" Donna stared at him, her lips trembling. She opened her mouth, but at first only a broken sound came out. When she finally spoke, her voice was so small, so defeated, it didn't sound like her at all. "Baby, you weren't supposed to be home." The words hit him like a physical blow. She wasn't relieved to see him. She was scared. Scared of what would happen now that he'd witnessed this. Scared of what Willa might do later. Scared. "I'm here now," Alvin said, his voice shaking. "I'm here, Mama. It's okay." He reached for her shoulder and she flinched. Actually flinched away from his touch. The movement was instinctive, automatic, the reflex of someone who'd been hurt too many times. Something inside Alvin's chest cracked open. He moved more slowly this time, telegraphing every motion, and carefully, so carefully, wrapped his arms around his mother's frail shoulders. She felt so thin. When had she gotten so thin? He could feel her bones through the soaked fabric of her dress, could feel every vertebra in her spine. The strong woman who used to carry him piggyback, who used to garden for hours in the summer heat, who used to dance in the kitchen while she cooked. She felt like she might break if he held her too tight. "Alvin, I can explain." Willa's voice sliced through the moment, and Alvin felt his mother tense in his arms. He looked up slowly, and when his eyes met Willa's, he saw her expression had completely changed. The cruel mask had slipped away, replaced by something softer, more calculated. Her eyes were wide and innocent, her voice sweet and reasonable. It's about respect, baby," she said, spreading her hands in a gesture of helplessness. "Your mother has been so difficult lately. She spilled food all over the floor on purpose, made a mess of the kitchen. She's been talking back to me, disrespecting me in my own house. I was only trying to teach her some accountability, the way anyone would handle someone who refuses to follow basic rules. She needs structure. She needs to understand there are consequences." "Shut up." The words came out so cold, so flat, that Willa actually took a step back. Alvin stood slowly, helping his mother to her feet and keeping her close to his side. She leaned against him, still trembling, and he could feel her tears soaking through his shirt. When he turned to face Willa fully, he didn't recognize the woman standing before him. Or maybe he was finally seeing her clearly for the first time. "Don't you dare," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't you dare stand there and justify what I just witnessed. Don't you dare pretend that dumping garbage on a 72-year-old woman is anything but cruelty." Willa's expression shifted again. This time, tears welled up in her eyes, perfect glistening tears that slid down her cheeks on cue. She pressed her hands to her chest, her voice breaking with practiced emotion. "But Alvin, you don't understand," she said, her bottom lip trembling. "I've been here alone with her for months while you're always traveling for work. Do you know how hard it's been? She needs boundaries. She needs discipline. I've been trying so hard to take care of her, to keep this house running, to be a good daughter-in-law while you're never here. She needs love!" Alvin's roar echoed off the kitchen walls, and Willa actually stumbled backward, her mask of innocence cracking. His mother pressed closer to him, her fingers clutching his suit jacket. "She needs dignity," Alvin continued, his voice dropping to something quiet and lethal. "She needs kindness. She needs someone who won't humiliate her, who won't abuse her, who won't dump trash on her head like she's nothing." He looked down at his mother, at the filth in her hair, at the bruises he was only now noticing on her arms, at the way she was shaking, and something fundamental shifted inside him. "She's my mother." "Willa," he said, each word deliberate and hard. "She raised me. She sacrificed everything for me. And you," his voice caught, "you did this to her." Willa opened her mouth to respond, but Alvin held up his hand. "Get out of my sight," he said. "Right now. Get out of this kitchen." For just a moment, Willa's mask slipped completely. Her tear-streaked face went cold, her eyes hard and calculating. She looked at Alvin with something that might have been contempt, might have been hatred, before she turned on her heel and stalked out of the kitchen, her heels clicking sharply against the tile. The moment she was gone, Alvin felt his mother's legs give out. He caught her, lowering them both to the floor, and held her as she sobbed against his chest. Deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere ancient and wounded. "I'm so sorry, Mama," he whispered into her hair, his own tears finally falling. "I should have been here. I should have protected you. But I swear to you, on everything I am, this ends today." And kneeling there on the garbage-strewn kitchen floor, holding his broken mother in his arms, Alvin Turner made a promise. Willa would answer for every bruise, every tear, every moment of terror. He would make absolutely certain of it. Alvin held his mother for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, his mind racing even as he whispered soothing words he wasn't sure she could hear. Her sobs had quieted to exhausted whimpers, and he could feel her going limp in his arms, the adrenaline draining from her body, leaving only bone-deep fatigue. He needed to call for help. He needed to document this. His mother needed a doctor. She needed the police. She needed evidence that this had happened, because some distant, calculating part of his brain knew that Willa would lie. She would spin this, twist it, make herself the victim somehow. He'd seen that transformation in the kitchen, the way she'd shifted from monster to martyr in seconds. Carefully, he shifted his mother's weight and pulled his phone from his pocket with one hand. His fingers were shaking as he dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? I need police and paramedics, Alvin said, his voice hoarse. I just came home and found my wife abusing my elderly mother. My mother needs medical attention. Sir, is anyone in immediate danger right now? No. I stopped it. But my mother, she's hurt. She's traumatized. Please, just send someone. The dispatcher's voice remained calm and professional as she took his address, asked him questions, assured him help was on the way. Alvin answered mechanically, his eyes never leaving his mother's face. She was staring at nothing, her eyes unfocused, and it terrified him more than the crying had. Mama, he said softly, ending the call. Help is coming, okay? A doctor is going to check you out. Make sure you're... A sharp knock on the front door made them both jump. His mother's hands clutched at his jacket, her eyes suddenly wide with panic. It's okay, Alvin said quickly. It's not her. I'll check who it is. He helped his mother into one of the kitchen chairs, grabbed a clean dish towel to gently wipe some of the filth from her face, then moved toward the front door. Through the frosted glass panel, he could see a small figure, a woman in a floral blouse. Alvin opened the door to find Mrs. Patricia Monroe standing on his porch, her brown face creased with worry. Patricia was 73, a widow who'd lived in the house next door for almost 30 years. She was holding her cell phone in one hand and had clearly thrown on her shoes in a hurry. They were mismatched, one black flat and one navy. Alvin, she said, her voice tight with concern. I heard shouting. I heard... She stopped, looking at his ruined suit, at the garbage stains on his pants, at whatever expression was on his face. Oh, baby, what happened? Something about the maternal warmth in her voice, the genuine concern, made Alvin's carefully maintained composure crack. It's my mother, he said, his voice breaking. Willa, she was... He couldn't finish the sentence. Patricia's eyes filled with tears, and she reached out to squeeze his hand. I know, she said quietly. Oh, Alvin, I know. Can I come in? Is Donna okay? Alvin stepped back to let her in, confused by her words. What do you mean, you know? Patricia didn't answer immediately. She moved past him toward the kitchen, her mismatched shoes shuffling softly on the hardwood. When she reached the doorway and saw Donna sitting there, still covered in garbage, still shaking, she pressed a hand to her mouth and let out a small sound of distress. Oh, Donna, Patricia breathed, moving quickly to kneel beside her friend. Oh, honey. Donna looked at Patricia, and something in her expression shifted. The blank, shocked stare gave way to fresh tears, and she reached for Patricia's hands like a drowning woman reaching for a rope. She caught me trying to call him, Donna whispered, so quietly Alvin had to strain to hear. I was trying to call Alvin, and she caught me and she said she'd put me somewhere no one would ever find me if I tried again. Patricia pulled Donna into a gentle hug, mindful of her frailty, and looked up at Alvin with eyes that held both sympathy and something that looked like guilt. "How long?" Alvin asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. "Mrs. Monroe, you said you know. How long has this been going on?" Patricia stood slowly, still holding Donna's hand. She looked at Alvin, and he could see her wrestling with something. Years of Southern politeness and minding one's own business warring with the truth that needed to be told. "Months," she finally said. "At least 4 months, maybe longer. I started hearing things around February, shouting, crying. At first I thought maybe it was the television, but then I realized the sounds were too consistent, always during the day when you were at work or traveling." Alvin felt like the floor was tilting beneath him. February. It was June now. 4 months of this, and he'd known nothing. "What kind of things?" he asked, though his stomach was already churning with dread. Patricia took a breath. "Screaming. Willa screaming at your mother, calling her terrible names. Stupid. Useless. Burden. I heard her tell Donna once that she was surprised you hadn't put her in a home yet, that she was just waiting for you to realize what a waste of space she was." Each word was a knife. Donna had gone very still in her chair, staring at her hands. "I heard doors slamming," Patricia continued, her voice gaining strength now that she'd started. "Locks clicking. There were days when I wouldn't see Donna at all, wouldn't see any lights on in her bedroom. I used to see her in the garden every morning, She'd wave to me while I had my coffee. But that stopped around March. I thought maybe she was sick, but then I'd see her at the window sometimes, just staring out, and she'd look so." Patricia's voice caught. "She'd look so sad, Alvin." Alvin moved to the counter, gripping the edge to steady himself. Behind him, he heard sirens in the distance getting closer. "Did you see her hurt my mother?" he asked. "Did you actually witness physical abuse?" Patricia nodded slowly. "Twice. Once through the kitchen window in April, I was returning a dish I'd borrowed. Came around to the back door because the front bell wasn't working. I saw Willa shove your mother hard enough that she fell. Donna hit the floor, and Willa just stood over her, yelling. I knocked on the window, and Willa saw me. She smiled. Alvin. She smiled at me and helped your mother up, acting like nothing had happened. And the second time? Last week, I saw Willa drag your mother into the house by her arm. Donna was crying, and there were groceries spilled all over the driveway. Willa left them there, just dragged her inside and slammed the door. I went and picked up the groceries, put them on your porch. They sat there for hours before anyone brought them in. The sirens were loud now, right outside. Alvin heard car doors slamming, footsteps on the porch, but he couldn't move. He was frozen by Patricia's words, by the horror of what his mother had endured while he was oblivious. Why didn't you call me? The question came out harsher than he intended. Why didn't you tell me? Patricia's face crumpled. I did, she said, and now tears were streaming down her cheeks. Alvin, I did call you, multiple times. I called your office 6 times between March and May. The world seemed to stop. What? I called and told your secretary, Karen, is that her name? I told her it was urgent, that it was about your mother, that you needed to call me back immediately. Patricia's hands twisted together. The first time she said you were in a meeting. The second time she said you were traveling. The third time she said you'd specifically instructed her that you couldn't be disturbed unless it was a business emergency. I tried to explain that this was about your mother, that it was important, but she said, Patricia's voice dropped. She said that you'd made it clear that family matters should be handled by your wife, and that I should take my concerns to Willa. Alvin's vision actually blurred for a moment. Karen, his secretary of 7 years, the woman he'd trusted to manage his schedule, to screen his calls, to handle his professional life so he could focus on building the business. Karen had blocked calls about his mother, had turned away someone trying to help. I even drove to your office once, Patricia continued. This was in April, after I saw Willa push Donna. The security guard in your building said you were out of town, and when I asked if I could leave a message, he called up to your office. Karen came all the way down to the lobby, and she told me very politely that you'd specifically instructed her that you were not to be bothered about your mother's adjustment period. Adjustment period? Alvin's voice was hollow. That's what she called it. She said you'd explained that Donna was having trouble adjusting to the new household dynamics, that there was some tension with Willa, but that you were confident they'd work it out. She made it sound like you already knew about the problems and had decided not to intervene. The front door opened, and 2 uniformed police officers entered, followed by 2 paramedics with their equipment. Alvin heard himself giving them information, pointing them toward his mother, explaining what he'd witnessed. It was like his body was operating on autopilot while his mind reeled. Someone had sabotaged him. Someone had actively prevented him from knowing his mother was being abused. Karen had created a wall between him and the truth, had made it seem like he didn't care, like he'd already decided his mother wasn't a priority. But why? One of the paramedics, a young woman with kind eyes, was kneeling beside Donna, speaking to her in low, gentle tones. The other was unpacking supplies. One of the officers was taking Patricia's statement, writing quickly in a small notebook. The second officer approached Alvin. Mr. Turner, I'm Officer Davis. We're going to need to speak with your wife. Is she still in the house? Upstairs, I think, Alvin said. Her name is Willa Chestnut. And you witnessed her dumping garbage on your mother? Yes. I came home early from a trip and found her. His voice broke again. I found her standing over my mother, dumping a trash can on her head. My mother was on the floor begging her to stop. Officer Davis's jaw tightened. Sir, I need you to know that we take elder abuse very seriously. With your permission, we'd like to photograph your mother's injuries, take statements from everyone present, and speak with your wife. Do whatever you need to do, Alvin said. Just make sure my mother is safe. Patricia appeared at his elbow, her small hand finding his. I'm so sorry I couldn't do more, she whispered. I tried, Alvin. I swear I tried. Alvin looked down at this elderly woman, this neighbor who'd tried to help when he hadn't even known help was needed. She'd witnessed his mother's suffering and had done her best to reach him, only to be blocked at every turn. It's not your fault, he said, squeezing her hand. You did more than most people would have. You kept trying. I should have tried harder. I should have... No. Alvin's voice was firm. You did what you could, but someone made sure I never got your messages. Someone made sure I stayed in the dark. He looked toward the stairs, where he could hear Officer Davis calling for Willa. And I'm going to find out why. The paramedics insisted on taking Donna to the hospital, but she'd refused, her hands clutching Alvin's jacket with surprising strength for someone so frail. Please don't make me leave, she'd whispered, her eyes wide with panic. Please, baby. I just want to stay here with you. Alvin had looked to the female paramedic, whose name tag read Chen. She'd given him a sympathetic look and said quietly, If she's stable and there's no immediate life-threatening injuries, we can't force her. But she really should be examined by a doctor. I'll get a doctor here, Alvin had promised. Within the hour. I swear. Now, as the police finished photographing the scene and taking preliminary statements, as Willa sat stone-faced in the living room with Officer Davis asking her questions in a carefully neutral tone, Alvin stood in his home office with his phone pressed to his ear, making the calls that would determine everything that came next. The first call was to James Crawford, his attorney. James had handled the purchase of this house, had drafted Alvin's will, had been his legal counsel for 12 years. More than that, he'd been a friend, someone Alvin trusted implicitly. James answered on the second ring. Alvin, aren't you supposed to be in Chicago? I need you at my house, Alvin said without preamble. Now, it's about my mother. It's bad, James. The shift in James's voice was immediate, all business sliding into place over personal concern. What happened? My wife has been abusing her. I walked in on it today. The police are here now, but I need... Alvin's voice caught. I need someone who can help me make sure she pays for this. Someone who can help me protect my mother. Can you come? I'm leaving my office now, James said. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't say anything more to the police without me present, understand? Not a word. James, I'm not the one who... I know. But elder abuse cases are complicated, and you live in this house too. They're going to have questions about what you knew and when you knew it. Let me handle it. 20 minutes. The second call was to Detective Sarah Lynn. Sarah wasn't just any detective with the city police. She was his mother's friend, someone who'd known Donna since Sarah was a rookie cop doing community outreach in the neighborhood 15 years ago. Donna had fed her, counseled her through a difficult divorce, been like an aunt to her. If anyone would care about this case personally, it would be Sarah. Sarah answered with the sound of traffic in the background. Alvin? What's wrong? Are you on duty? He asked. Just finishing up a scene. Why? I need you to come to my house. He took a breath, steadying himself. Someone's been hurting my mother, Sarah, for months. I just found out today. I need someone I trust on this case. There was a beat of silence. When Sarah spoke again, her voice was cold and professional. But Alvin could hear the fury underneath. Who? My wife. I'm 10 minutes away. Don't let anyone leave that house. The third call was the hardest. Dr. Michael Harper had been Donna's physician for 20 years. He'd seen her through pneumonia, through the death of Alvin's father, through her transition into her 70s with grace and strength. Michael was semi-retired now, only taking appointments with long-term patients. But Alvin knew he'd come. Michael, Alvin said when the doctor answered, I need you to make a house call. It's my mother. She's been hurt, and she won't go to the hospital. I need you to examine her, to document her injuries. Can you come? Dr. Harper, bless him, didn't ask questions. I'll grab my bag. Give me 30 minutes. Alvin ended the call and stood for a moment in his office, surrounded by the trappings of his success, the mahogany desk, the leather chairs, the framed awards and photos from business conferences. All of it suddenly seemed hollow, meaningless. What good was any of this if he'd been too busy building his empire to notice his mother was being destroyed? He heard footsteps on the stairs and looked up to see Willa being escorted down by Officer Davis. She'd changed clothes, he noticed. The red dress was gone, replaced by a simple gray outfit that made her look smaller, more vulnerable. Her face was composed, her eyes dry. She looked like a woman who'd done nothing wrong, who was confused and concerned about all this fuss. The transformation was masterful, and it made Alvin's blood boil. Their eyes met for a moment as she passed his office door. Willa's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her gaze. Calculation, perhaps, or contempt. Then she was past, being guided toward the front door. "Mrs. Chestnut," Officer Davis was saying, "we'd like you to come down to the station to answer some more questions." "Am I under arrest?" Willa's voice was calm, almost detached. "Not at this time, but then I'd prefer to have my attorney present before I answer any more questions. I'm happy to cooperate, officer, but I think it's best if I have legal representation given the misunderstanding that seems to be occurring here." Misunderstanding. She'd called it a misunderstanding. Alvin moved to the office doorway. "There's no misunderstanding," he said, his voice low. "I saw what you did. I saw you standing over her with that trash can. I saw my mother on the floor, covered in garbage, begging you to stop." Willa turned to look at him, and her expression remained perfectly neutral. "You saw the end of a situation you don't understand, Alvin. Your mother had an accident. She spilled food everywhere, made a terrible mess. And when I tried to clean it up, she became agitated, confrontational. I was disposing of the waste, and she was upset because I'd asked her to be more careful. You walked in at the worst possible moment and drew the wrong conclusion." The lie was so smooth, so plausible, delivered with such calm confidence that for a moment Alvin almost doubted his own eyes. Almost. But then he remembered his mother's face, the terror in her eyes, the way she'd flinched from his touch. "Get her out of my house," he said to Officer Davis. Willa left without another word, her head held high, every inch the wronged wife. Alvin watched through the window as she got into the police cruiser, watched as it pulled away from the curb. Only when it was out of sight did he allow himself to breathe. Patricia was still in the kitchen with Donna, the two elderly women sitting close together, speaking in low voices. The other paramedic had left supplies: gauze, antiseptic wipes, bottles of water. Donna was sipping from one of the bottles, her hands still trembling. Alvin approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Mama, my lawyer is on his way. And Detective Lynn, you remember Sarah? She's coming too. And Dr. Harper will be here soon to check you over. Is that okay?" Donna looked up at him, and the gratitude in her eyes nearly broke him. "You believe me," she said softly. "You don't think I'm making this up?" "Making it up?" Alvin knelt beside her chair. "Mama, why would I ever think that?" She said. Donna's voice dropped to barely a whisper. She said if I ever told you, she'd make sure no one believed me. She said I was old, that people would think I was confused, that they'd put me in a home for people with dementia. She said she'd tell them I was dangerous, that I attacked her, and they'd put me somewhere where no one would ever find me. Patricia made a small sound of distress and squeezed Donna's hand tighter. "She told you that?" Alvin felt rage bubbling up again, hot and righteous. Donna nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "She said you'd believe her over me, that you trusted her, that I was just a burden you kept around out of obligation." She said, her voice broke. She said you'd probably be relieved when she finally convinced you to put me in a facility. No. Alvin took both of his mother's hands in his, mindful of how delicate they felt. Mama, no. You are not a burden. You never have been. I would never put you anywhere you didn't want to be, and I will always, always believe you. But she's your wife, Donna whispered. You love her. Alvin thought about that. About the woman he'd married 3 years ago. The woman who'd seemed so perfect, so sophisticated, so supportive of his career. The woman who'd suggested they invite his mother to live with them after she'd had a fall, who'd insisted it was the right thing to do. Had it all been an act? Had she been planning this from the beginning? I don't know what I felt for her, Alvin said honestly. But I know what I feel now. And I know that whatever happens next, you're my priority. Not her. Not my career. You. James Crawford arrived 17 minutes after Alvin's call, striding through the front door with his briefcase in hand and his jaw set in a way that meant business. He was a tall man in his 50s, with gray threading through his dark hair and the kind of presence that made people listen when he spoke. He found Alvin in the kitchen and took in the scene. The garbage still scattered on the floor. The elderly women huddled together. The supplies the paramedics had left behind. His expression hardened. Tell me everything, he said. Alvin did, speaking in short, clipped sentences. James listened without interruption, his eyes moving between Alvin and Donna, assessing, cataloging, building a case in his mind. The police will want to interview you both extensively, James said when Alvin finished. They'll need detailed statements. But first, I want Dr. Harper to document everything. Every injury, every sign of neglect. Everything. Can your mother handle that? They both looked at Donna, who straightened slightly in her chair despite her exhaustion. I can do what needs to be done, she said. And for a moment, Alvin heard an echo of the strong woman she'd been before all this. Dr. Michael Harper arrived 23 minutes after Alvin's call, his medical bag in hand and concern etched deep in the lines of his face. He was a man in his late 60s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the steady hands of someone who'd spent a lifetime healing people. Donna, he said, moving immediately to her side. Let me look at you, dear. The examination took almost an hour. Dr. Harper worked methodically, gently, narrating into a small recording device as he went. James stood nearby, taking his own notes. Patricia held Donna's hand throughout, and Alvin stood against the wall, forcing himself to watch, to bear witness to what had been done to his mother. The litany of injuries was devastating. Multiple contusions in various stages of healing, Dr. Harper said, his voice professionally detached, even as his hands trembled slightly. Upper arms, shoulders, ribcage, pattern consistent with gripping and shoving, malnutrition, dehydration. Patient reports difficulty swallowing, possible damage to throat or esophagus from forced vomiting or restricted access to food. He examined her wrist, the one that looked slightly wrong. Previous fracture, approximately 6 to 8 weeks old, improperly set, would have been extremely painful, should have received immediate medical attention. He looked up at Donna. Why didn't you see a doctor when this happened? She wouldn't let me, Donna whispered. I fell. She pushed me, and I put my hand out. She said if I told anyone, she'd say I was clumsy, that she couldn't trust me alone anymore. She wrapped it herself and said it would be fine. Dr. Harper's expression was grim. It's not fine. The bone healed incorrectly. You may need surgery to correct it. He continued his examination, documenting everything. Signs of stress-induced hair loss. Weight loss of approximately 30 pounds since her last visit to his office 6 months ago. Evidence of repeated trauma to the shins and forearms. Defensive wounds, he called them. The kind that came from trying to protect yourself from blows. When he finally finished, Dr. Harper pulled off his gloves and looked directly at Alvin. "This is systematic abuse," he said bluntly. "Long-term, calculated, severe. Your mother has been tortured, Alvin. There's no other word for it." The word hung in the air. Tortured. And Alvin felt something inside him go cold and hard. Detective Sarah Lynn arrived while Dr. Harper was finishing his paperwork. She came through the door like a force of nature, her badge already out, her dark eyes sweeping the scene with professional assessment. But when she saw Donna, frail, bruised Donna, her expression cracked. "Miss Donna," she breathed, moving to kneel beside the woman who'd once made her chicken soup when she had the flu. "Oh, Miss Donna, what did she do to you?" The formal interview process began then, with Sarah taking statements from everyone. Patricia recounted everything she'd witnessed, her voice steady now that official help had arrived. Donna, exhausted but determined, walked Sarah through months of abuse. The verbal attacks, the physical violence, the psychological torture of threats and isolation. Alvin watched his mother speak, watched her find strength he didn't know she had left. And he made a silent promise to her, to himself, to everyone in that room. Willa would never touch his mother again, never hurt her, never even see her. He would use every resource at his disposal, spend every dollar he had, call in every favor, leverage every connection to make sure of it. His mother had suffered in silence while he was blind. That ended today. Whatever it took, however long it took, he would make this right. He would protect her the way he should have been protecting her all along. Detective Sarah Lynn had been a cop for 16 years, and she'd developed instincts that rarely failed her. As she stood in the pristine kitchen of Alvin Turner's brownstone, those instincts were screaming. The scene was too clean. Not the garbage on the floor. That was evidence of what had happened today. But everything else was immaculate in a way that felt wrong, sterile, like a stage set, rather than a home where people actually lived. Her eyes tracked across the room, cataloging details. The marble countertops gleamed without a single water spot. The stainless steel appliances showed no fingerprints. Even the garbage scattered on the floor looked oddly placed, as if someone had been very selective about where they dumped it to avoid certain areas. Then she saw it, a tiny red light blinking from the corner of the ceiling, partially hidden behind the decorative crown molding. "Mr. Turner," Sarah said, her voice carefully neutral, "do you have security cameras in your home?" Alvin looked up from where he sat beside his mother, confusion crossing his face. "No, I never installed any." "Why?" Sarah pointed toward the corner. "Because there's one right there." Everyone's heads turned. The small camera was barely visible, a sleek black device no bigger than a doorbell camera, positioned to capture the entire kitchen. Now that they knew what to look for, the lens was obvious. "I didn't put that there," Alvin said, standing slowly. "I don't even know when I do," Donna whispered. Her voice was so quiet they almost missed it. "She installed them in March. She said it was for security, in case someone broke in while Alvin was traveling. She said she wanted me to feel safe." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Where else did she put them? Donna's hands twisted in her lap. "I don't know. I only saw her installing that one-and-one in my bedroom. She said—" Her voice caught. She said if anything happened to me, she wanted to make sure there was footage to show what really occurred. The implication hung in the air like poison. Willa hadn't installed cameras for security. She'd installed them for surveillance, for control, to make sure Donna knew she was always being watched, and possibly to create her own version of events if she ever needed to defend herself. Sarah pulled out her phone and called the precinct. "I need a tech team at my location immediately. We've got surveillance equipment that needs to be secured and analyzed. Possible elder abuse case with video evidence." James Crawford had been making his own phone calls, pacing in the hallway with his cell pressed to his ear. Now he returned to the kitchen, his expression grave. "I've got a forensic IT specialist coming," he said. "But detective, we should search the house. If there are cameras in 2 rooms, there are probably more. And I'd like to see what else your wife might have been hiding, Mr. Turner. With your permission, of course." Alvin nodded. "Search everywhere. I want to know what the hell has been going on in my own house." Over the next 2 hours, the brownstone became the center of a carefully controlled investigation. Sarah's tech team arrived and began systematically sweeping the house for electronic devices. They found cameras in 7 locations: the kitchen, Donna's bedroom, the living room, the hallway outside Donna's room, the front entrance, the back door, and disturbingly, in the bathroom Donna used. "This is surveillance at a level that goes beyond security," Sarah's tech specialist, a young man named Rodriguez, reported. "These cameras have motion activation, night vision, and they're all linked to a cloud storage account. Whoever set this up wanted constant monitoring." "Can you access the footage?" Sarah asked. "Already on it. The account is registered to a Willa Chestnut. Password protected, but not encrypted. Give me 30 minutes. While Rodriguez worked on accessing the camera footage, James and Sarah conducted a more traditional search of the premises. Willa's home office was on the 2nd floor, a small room decorated in whites and grays that matched the rest of the house's aesthetic. The desk was organized with the same meticulous care as the kitchen: pens in a holder, papers in neat stacks, a laptop closed and centered on the desk pad. James, wearing gloves that Sarah had provided, began carefully going through the drawers. He found the usual detritus of home office life: bills, bank statements, warranties for appliances. Then, in the bottom drawer, filed under legal documents, he found something that made him go very still. "Sarah," he said quietly, "you need to see this." He pulled out a manila folder and laid it on the desk. Inside were several documents, all bearing official-looking headers and stamps. Sarah leaned over his shoulder to read, and her jaw tightened with each passing line. They were power of attorney documents for Donna Turner. Comprehensive, durable power of attorney that would give Willa complete control over Donna's financial and medical decisions. The documents were dated April 15th, 2 months ago, and bore what appeared to be Donna's signature at the bottom. "That's not my mother's signature," Alvin said from the doorway. They hadn't heard him come up the stairs. He crossed the room in 3 strides and stared down at the papers. "My mother's handwriting is shaky. Arthritis in her hands. This is too smooth, too confident. It's a forgery." James carefully photographed each page with his phone, then examined the documents more closely. "These were prepared by an attorney," he said, pointing to the letterhead at the top. "Marcus Reynolds, Esquire, Reynolds and Associates, Elder Law Specialists." He looked at Sarah. "Do you know this firm?" "I know of it," Sarah said, her expression darkening. "They've been on our radar a few times. Nothing we could prove, but there have been complaints from families who felt their elderly relatives were being taken advantage of. Cases where someone suddenly signed over power of attorney and then ended up in expensive care facilities while their property was sold. Marcus Reynolds always had documentation that looked legitimate, always claimed the elderly person had come to him of their own free will. "We need to run Willa's phone records," James said. "If she's working with this Reynolds character, there will be communication between them." Sarah was already pulling out her phone. "I'll need a warrant for that, and I'll need to move fast before she lawyers up completely. But given what we've found here, I think I can get a judge to sign off." Downstairs, Rodriguez called out, "Detective Lynn, you're going to want to see this." They rushed back down to find the tech specialist had set up his laptop on the dining room table, the screen showing a grid of camera feeds. His expression was grim. "I've pulled footage from the past 2 weeks," he said. "It's bad. Really bad." He clicked on one of the feeds, and the kitchen appeared on screen. Date stamped May 28th, 3:47 p.m. The quality was excellent, the audio crystal clear. They watched as Willa entered the frame, her expression cold and hard. Nothing like the composed woman who'd left with the police earlier. Donna was at the kitchen table, and Willa walked up behind her and grabbed a fistful of her hair, yanking her head back. The audio came through clearly. "You stupid old woman. You think I don't know you tried to use the phone again? You think I'm an idiot?" Donna's voice, small and terrified. "I'm sorry. I just wanted to talk to my son. I miss him. He doesn't want to talk to you. He's tired of you. Do you know how many times he's told me he wishes you'd just go away? How many times he said you're a burden?" Even through the screen, they could see Donna's face crumple. "That's not true. My baby wouldn't say that." "Your baby," Willa mocked, releasing Donna's hair with a shove. "He's a grown man who's sick of taking care of an old woman who can't even feed herself properly." Rodriguez fast-forwarded through the footage. There were dozens of incidents. Willa shoving Donna into walls. Willa locking the door to Donna's bedroom from the outside. The camera catching her turning the key and pocketing it. Willa bringing Donna a plate of food, setting it just out of reach, and watching with cold satisfaction as Donna struggled to stand and get it. Her injured wrist clearly causing her pain. In one particularly horrifying clip from June 3rd, Willa stood in Donna's doorway and said, "You know what's going to happen, don't you? You're going to sign those papers for me, and then you're going to have a little accident. Maybe you'll forget to take your medication properly. Maybe you'll take too much. These things happen with elderly people. No one will question it." Alvin made a sound like he'd been punched. Patricia, who'd insisted on staying, pressed a hand to her mouth and turned away. "Stop," James said. "We've seen enough. This is all evidence, all of it." Sarah nodded to Rodriguez, who paused the footage. "I need all of this preserved," she said. "Chain of custody documentation, everything by the book. This isn't just elder abuse anymore. That last clip, that's premeditated intent to harm, possibly to murder." James was already back on his phone, calling someone. When he hung up, his expression was set in hard lines. "I've got my investigator looking into Marcus Reynolds and any connection to Willa. We need to know how deep this goes." His phone rang within 15 minutes. James listened, his expression growing darker, then put the call on speaker so everyone could hear. "Boss, you're not going to believe this," his investigator, a woman named Tracy Moore, said. "I pulled phone records for Willa Chestnut, public records from her cell provider, nothing that needed a warrant. She's been in contact with Marcus Reynolds since February. Multiple calls per day, text messages, the works. Can you read the texts? Sarah asked. Most of them are deleted from the server, but I got a few. February 14th, Willa to Marcus. She's being difficult. Need the papers ready sooner than planned. Marcus to Willa. Be patient. These things take time. Can't rush the setup. March 3rd, Willa to Marcus. When can we meet? Need to discuss timeline. Marcus replies with an address. It's a hotel in the city, the Belmont Suites. Tracy paused. Here's where it gets interesting. I cross-referenced credit card statements, also public record from a civil suit Marcus was involved in last year. He checked into the Belmont Suites 6 times between February and May. Each time there's a corresponding room service charge for 2. The implication was clear. Willa and Marcus weren't just professional associates. They were having an affair. Alvin's face had gone ashen. She was sleeping with him while she was torturing my mother and planning to steal her estate. It gets worse, Tracy said. I did some digging into Marcus Reynolds' practice. He specializes in elder law, like Detective Lynn said, but specifically in helping people gain control of elderly relatives' assets. He's been sued 3 times by family members claiming their relatives' signatures were forged on power of attorney documents. All 3 cases were settled out of court with NDAs. The pattern is always the same. Elderly person with substantial assets, family member or caregiver who suddenly gets power of attorney, assets start being transferred, and by the time the rest of the family notices, it's too late. James swore under his breath. How much are we talking about? What's Donna's estate worth? Alvin answered, his voice hollow. My father left her the house. It's paid off, worth maybe $800,000 in this market. Plus, she has investment properties, 2 rental homes in adjacent neighborhoods. Combined with her savings and my father's life insurance, probably close to $2.5 million. The number hung in the air. $2.5 million. More than enough motive for conspiracy and fraud. More than enough motive for murder. Sarah's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her expression hardened. Judge signed the warrant. I can officially pull Willa's complete phone records now, including deleted messages. And I'm getting a warrant for Marcus Reynolds' records, too. Do it, James said. And we need to move fast. If Willa realizes how much evidence we've gathered, she might try to contact Reynolds and coordinate their stories. Or worse, destroy evidence. Patricia, who'd been silent through most of this, finally spoke up. That woman was going to kill Donna, she said, her voice shaking. She was going to steal everything and then murder her. And none of us would have known until it was too late. Alvin moved to his mother, who'd been sitting quietly through all the revelations, her face pale but composed. He knelt beside her chair and took her hands. Mama, he said softly, I need you to know something. This is not your fault. None of this is your fault. You survived. You held on until I could find you. And now I promise you, I swear to you on everything I hold sacred, she will never hurt you again, and neither will he. Donna looked at her son, and tears spilled down her weathered cheeks. I was so scared, she whispered. I thought she was going to win. I thought she was going to take everything and make me disappear, and you'd never know what really happened. But I do know, Alvin said fiercely. We all know, and we have proof. We have her on camera. We have the forged documents. We have the phone records. She's done, Mama. They both are. Sarah closed her laptop with a decisive snap. I'm bringing Marcus Reynolds in for questioning tonight, she said. and I'm recommending the DA upgrade the charges against Willa to include conspiracy to commit fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and about a dozen other felonies. By the time I'm done building this case, she'll be looking at decades in prison." James nodded. "And I'll be filing civil suits on behalf of Mrs. Turner. We'll freeze every asset Willa has, go after Reynolds's practice, and make sure every penny of legal fees comes out of their hides." As the team continued planning their next moves, Alvin stayed beside his mother, holding her hand and feeling the weight of how close he'd come to losing her completely. If he hadn't come home early, if he hadn't walked through that door at that exact moment, Willa's plan might have worked. His mother might have signed those papers under duress, might have ended up in some facility where she'd accidentally overdosed, and he would have been none the wiser until it was too late. But he had come home, and now, with evidence mounting and allies surrounding him, he was going to make sure that Willa and Marcus paid for every moment of suffering they'd inflicted. The hidden truth was out now, exposed to the harsh light of justice, and there would be nowhere left for them to hide. Tony Santos arrived at the brownstone at 9 p.m., carrying a leather messenger bag and wearing the slightly rumpled look of a man who'd been working nonstop for hours. James Crawford's private investigator was in his mid-40s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a reputation for finding information that people desperately wanted to stay hidden. He'd worked cases ranging from corporate espionage to infidelity, and he had contacts in places that made even detectives like Sarah Lynn raise their eyebrows. James met him at the door and led him into the dining room, where the makeshift command center had been established. Laptops covered the table, printouts of documents were spread across every available surface, and the air smelled like the Chinese takeout someone had ordered, but no one had really eaten. Donna had finally been convinced to rest in one of the upstairs guest rooms, with Patricia stationed outside her door like a guardian angel. Alvin looked like he hadn't slept in days, his expensive suit rumpled and stained, his tie long since discarded. Tony set his bag on the table and pulled out a thick folder. "I've been working on this for the past 6 hours," he said without preamble. "And what I found is worse than we thought." Sarah gestured for him to continue, her notebook already open. Rodriguez had paused his work on the surveillance footage to listen. "Let's start with Marcus Reynolds," Tony said, pulling out the first set of documents. 42 years old, divorced, no kids. Graduated from a mid-tier law school, passed the bar on his 3rd attempt. He's been practicing elder law for 12 years, and his firm specializes in what they call crisis management for families dealing with elderly relatives. "That's a nice way of saying he helps people steal from their own family members," James muttered. "Essentially, yes. I found 7 cases in the past 5 years where families have accused Reynolds of coercing elderly clients into signing over power of attorney. Only 3 of those cases made it to court, and all 3 settled quietly with NDAs. But I talked to 2 of the families tonight, people who are still bitter enough to break those NDAs if it means stopping him from doing it to someone else." Tony pulled out a photograph of a middle-aged woman. "This is Helen Chen. Her mother, Susan, was 81 when she met Marcus Reynolds through a caregiver who was actually working with him. Within 6 months, Susan had signed over power of attorney, her house was sold, and she was placed in a memory care facility despite having no diagnosis of dementia. Susan died 9 months later. Helen estimates her mother's estate was worth about $1.8 million. By the time Susan died, there was less than $50,000 left." "Where did the money go?" Alvin asked, his voice hollow. "Real estate investments that somehow never materialized, medical expenses that were grossly inflated, legal fees. Reynolds is very good at making money disappear in ways that look legitimate on paper. Tony pulled out another document. The second family I spoke to told an almost identical story. Elderly father, substantial assets, sudden power of attorney, rapid depletion of funds, death within a year. Sarah's pen moved rapidly across her notepad. Did either family suspect foul play in the deaths? Both did, but neither could prove it. The deaths were ruled natural causes. Heart attack in one case, stroke in the other. Both occurred in care facilities where Reynolds had placed them, and in both cases, there were questions about medication management that were never fully answered. The room went silent. The implication was clear. Marcus Reynolds wasn't just stealing from elderly victims. He was potentially killing them to cover his tracks and speed up his payday. Now let's talk about Willa, Tony continued, pulling out a new set of documents. Willa Chestnut. Maiden name Willa Harris. 36 years old. Married to Alvin Turner 3 years ago. Before that, she was briefly married to a man named David Okafor. That marriage lasted 11 months and ended in divorce. Alvin's head jerked up. She told me she'd never been married before. She lied, Tony said flatly. The divorce was finalized 4 months before she met you. And here's where it gets interesting. David Okafor filed for divorce after discovering Willa was having an affair with his business partner and that she'd forged his signature on documents that gave her access to his business accounts. He didn't press charges, he just wanted her gone. But I tracked him down and spoke to him tonight. He said Willa was the most manipulative person he'd ever met, and he wasn't surprised she'd found another target. Tony spread out a series of printouts showing financial records. I was able to access Willa's banking records through some creative research. She's been in contact with Marcus Reynolds since last October, 8 months before she started abusing your mother. The first contact was through his law office website contact form, a message asking about options for managing elderly family members with difficult personalities. She was planning this before we even invited my mother to move in, Alvin said, his voice shaking. She suggested it. After my mother had that fall last November, Willa was the one who said we should have her come live with us instead of her staying in her own house. I thought she was being kind, generous. She was positioning her target, James said grimly. Get your mother under the same roof where she could control her, isolate her, and work her plan. Tony nodded. The phone records tell the story. Willa and Marcus exchanged over 300 calls and text messages between October and now. Most of the texts have been deleted from her phone, but I was able to recover some through her cloud backup that she apparently didn't know was active. He pulled out his own laptop and opened a file. These are the recovered messages. Fair warning, they're not pleasant. The first message appeared on screen, dated February 2nd. Willa to Marcus. The old woman is tougher than expected. Doesn't rattle easily. May need to escalate to break her down enough to sign. Marcus's response. Don't leave marks that can't be hidden. Psychological pressure is safer than physical. Make her think she's losing her mind. March 15th. Willa to Marcus. She tried to call her son today. I caught her and took her phone. When can we move on the papers? Marcus. Documents are ready, but she needs to be more isolated first. Cut her off from any outside contact. The neighbor is a problem. Can you handle it? Willa. Already working on it. Started telling people she's getting confused, having memory issues, setting the stage. Sarah's expression was carved from stone. They were gaslighting her, making people think she was incompetent to set up the narrative. Tony clicked to the next series of messages. It gets worse. April 20th, after Willa broke your mother's wrist. Willa to Marcus. Had an incident. She fell and broke her wrist. I told her if she goes to a doctor, I'll tell them she's become violent and unstable. She's terrified now. This might be our breakthrough. Marcus replied, perfect timing. Fear makes people compliant. Get her to sign within the next 2 weeks while she's still in pain. Pain and fear together will make her do anything. Alvin stood abruptly and walked to the window, his hands clenched into fists. Patricia, who had come downstairs for coffee, put a hand on his shoulder but said nothing. May 8th, Tony continued quietly. This is where the plan becomes clear. Marcus to Willa. Once we have POA and the properties are transferred, we need to move quickly on phase 2. The old woman can't be allowed to recover and challenge anything. I have a contact who can help make it look natural. Heart medication overdose is almost impossible to prove as anything other than an elderly person getting confused about their dosing. Willa's response. How long after we transfer the assets? Marcus. 2 weeks minimum, 4 weeks maximum. Long enough that the transactions don't look suspicious, short enough that she can't cause problems. And remember, we need to make sure the son doesn't look too closely at the estate details before we finish. Before they finished, James repeated slowly, meaning before they killed Donna and moved on to the next phase. Tony nodded and pulled up another set of messages. This is from May 30th, just last week. The conversation turns to Alvin. The messages appeared on screen, and the room's temperature seemed to drop. Marcus. What about the son? Once the mother is gone, he'll inherit everything as your husband. But he'll also have questions. He seems like the type who pays attention to details. Willa. I've been thinking about that. Alvin travels constantly for work. Accidents happen on business trips. Hotel fires, car accidents, muggings gone wrong. Once I inherit from him, we split everything and disappear. You to the Caymans like you planned, me somewhere without extradition treaties. Marcus. You'd do that? Kill him too? Willa. He's a means to an end. I never loved him. He was just the vehicle to get access to the old woman's money. Once she's gone and he's gone, I'm set for life. We both are. Marcus. I have contacts for that kind of work too. Has to look completely natural though. Can't have any hint of foul play. Willa. Leave it to me. I'll set it up for his next international trip. Somewhere with a less thorough police investigation. Maybe Brazil or Mexico. The room was utterly silent. Alvin was still standing at the window, his shoulders rigid. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely recognizable. She was going to murder my mother and then murder me. Yes, Tony said simply. This wasn't just theft. This was a calculated plan to kill 2 people and steal everything they had. Sarah stood and began pacing. This changes everything. We're not talking about elder abuse and fraud anymore. We're talking about conspiracy to commit multiple murders. This is life in prison territory. Possibly even death penalty depending on how the DA wants to charge it. James was already thinking several steps ahead. We need to be strategic about how we play this. If we arrest both of them right now on the evidence we have, we'll get convictions. But if they lawyer up immediately, they might be able to suppress some of this evidence, claim the texts were jokes or fantasies, argue that they never actually attempted any murders. So what are you suggesting? Alvin turned from the window, his face haggard. We set a trap, James said. We make them think their plan is working. We get them to incriminate themselves further, ideally on tape with explicit admissions of intent. We build a case so airtight, that no jury in the world would let them walk. Sarah considered this. It's risky. If something goes wrong, nothing will go wrong, James interrupted. Because we'll control every variable. Alvin, you'll need to pretend that everything is normal. That you're willing to give Willa the benefit of the doubt. That you believe this was all a misunderstanding. I can't do that, Alvin said immediately. I can't look at her and pretend. You can, James said firmly. Because if you don't, she'll realize we know everything, and she'll run. Or worse, she'll do something desperate. Your mother is safe now. We'll make sure she stays safe. But Willa and Marcus are dangerous, and cornered dangerous people are unpredictable. If we want them behind bars for the rest of their lives, we need to do this right. Tony pulled out another document. I'd suggest we start with Marcus. He's the weak link. His entire career is built on a house of cards, and he knows it. If we can get him on tape admitting to the plan, admitting to the previous cases, he might flip on Willa to save himself. And if he doesn't? Patricia asked. Then we get Willa to flip on him, Sarah said. But either way, we need more than recovered text messages. We need recordings of them discussing the plan in detail. We need proof of the murder-for-hire contacts Marcus mentioned. We need evidence that will stand up to the best defense attorneys money can buy. Alvin was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. What do you need me to do? First, we tell Willa that the police talked to you and explained that she has a right to remain in the house until charges are formally filed, James said. We make her think she has time to execute her plan. Then you wear a wire and have a conversation with her. Tell her you saw the power of attorney documents, that you're concerned about your mother's mental state, that maybe Willa was right about Donna needing more structured care. You want me to act like I'm on her side. Exactly. Make her think you're wavering, that you might be convinced that she was in the right. If she thinks she can manipulate you, she'll keep talking. And while she's talking, she'll confess to everything. Sarah pulled out her phone. I'll coordinate with the DA's office. Get immunity agreements ready if Marcus or Willa decides to cooperate. Set up surveillance outside Marcus's office and home, and I'll get the wire equipment we'll need for Alvin. How long do we have? Alvin asked. Tony checked his notes. Based on the messages, they were planning to finalize everything within the next month. But now that you've discovered the abuse, they'll know their timeline is accelerated. My guess is they'll try to move within the next week, maybe sooner. Then we move faster, James said. We set the trap tomorrow. Alvin brings Willa back to the house, tells her he wants to talk. We record everything. And then we bring them both down so hard they never see daylight again. Patricia spoke up, her voice steady despite the horror of what they'd learned. And what about Donna? She needs to know what's happening. She needs to know she's safe. I'll tell her, Alvin said quietly. She deserves to know the truth, all of it. And she deserves to know that we're going to make sure these people never hurt anyone again. The team worked late into the night, planning every detail of the trap they would spring. Outside the brownstones' windows, the city moved on, oblivious to the conspiracy that had nearly succeeded, to the murders that had almost happened, to the elderly woman who had survived through sheer stubborn will. But inside, a different kind of justice was being prepared. Cold, methodical, and absolutely certain. Willa Chestnut and Marcus Reynolds had written their own ending when they sent those messages, when they planned their murders, when they underestimated the people who loved Donna Turner. Now all that remained was for that ending to play out exactly as it should, with both conspirators in handcuffs facing the consequences of their greed, their cruelty, and their fatal miscalculation. The trap was set. Tomorrow it would snap shut. The wire felt cold against Alvin's chest, the small microphone taped just below his collarbone and hidden beneath his dress shirt. Detective Sarah Lynn had been meticulous in placing it, her hands steady and professional as she'd explained exactly how this would work. The transmitter was clipped to his belt at the small of his back, no bigger than a deck of cards, and the whole setup was invisible under his clothes. "Remember," Sarah had said as she adjusted the equipment, "let her talk. Don't lead her too much or any confession becomes questionable in court. Ask open-ended questions. Act confused, hurt, willing to be convinced. Make her think she's winning." Now, standing in his own living room at 10 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, Alvin felt like he was preparing for battle. James Crawford was in the kitchen with two uniformed officers, listening through headphones connected to the wire's receiver. Sarah was coordinating the simultaneous raid on Marcus Reynolds' office across town, her team ready to move the moment Willa incriminated herself and her co-conspirator. Donna was safe at Patricia's house next door, with another officer stationed discreetly outside. She'd hugged Alvin before he left, her frail arms surprisingly strong around his waist, and whispered, "Make her pay for what she did. Not just to me. To all of us." He'd promised he would. The front door opened, and Willa walked in, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. She'd been staying at a hotel since her initial questioning, released on her own recognizance pending formal charges. She looked immaculate, as always. Cream-colored blouse, tailored black pants, her hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. Only the tightness around her eyes betrayed any stress. "Alvin," she said, her voice carefully modulated to sound both cautious and hopeful. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. I wasn't sure you would after everything." "We need to talk," Alvin said, keeping his voice neutral. "There are things I don't understand, things that don't make sense." Willa set her purse on the console table and moved into the living room, settling onto the sofa with practiced grace. "I know this has been incredibly difficult for you, for all of us, but I think if we can just talk calmly, I can help you understand what's really been happening." Alvin sat in the chair across from her, maintaining distance. "The police showed me some documents they found in your office. Power of attorney papers for my mother, with her signature." He watched Willa's face carefully. There was a flicker of something, calculation perhaps, before her expression settled into concerned confusion. "Oh," she said softly. "Those." "Alvin, I was going to tell you about those. I was just waiting for the right time." "The right time to tell me you were trying to get legal control over my mother's assets?" "It's not like that," Willa said, leaning forward earnestly. "Your mother has been declining, Alvin. You haven't been here to see it, but I have. The confusion, the forgetfulness, the mood swings. I was worried about her ability to manage her own affairs. I consulted with an attorney about the best way to protect her, to protect you, if she became unable to make sound decisions." "Marcus Reynolds," Alvin said flatly. "That's the attorney you consulted." Willa's pause was barely perceptible, but Alvin caught it. "Yes. He specializes in elder law. He came highly recommended." "Recommended by whom?" "I don't remember exactly. I think I found him online." Willa's voice remained calm, but Alvin could see her mind working behind her eyes. "The point is, he helped me understand the legal options available. The power of attorney was meant to be a precaution, something we'd only use if your mother's condition deteriorated to the point where she couldn't care for herself." But you had her sign it, Alvin said, without telling me, without discussing it with me at all. I was trying to spare you the stress of dealing with it, Willa said, her voice taking on a wounded quality. You're always so busy, always traveling, always working. I thought I was helping by handling these difficult family matters so you wouldn't have to worry about them. Alvin forced himself to look uncertain, to let doubt creep into his expression. I just don't understand why you didn't talk to me first, why you went behind my back. This was the moment. He could see Willa assessing him, trying to determine if he was truly wavering or if this was a trap. Her next words would determine everything. Because, Willa said slowly, I knew you'd be emotional about it. You love your mother. Of course you do. But love can blind us to reality, Alvin. Your mother isn't the woman she used to be. She's become difficult, unstable, sometimes even aggressive. I was trying to protect both of you from a situation that was only going to get worse. Aggressive? Alvin kept his voice level despite the rage building in his chest. My mother has never been aggressive in her life. You don't see what I see, Willa insisted. You're not here day after day dealing with her mood swings, her accusations, her paranoia. Do you know what she told Patricia? She claimed I was abusing her. Abusing her, Alvin, as if I would ever hurt an elderly woman. It's textbook dementia paranoia. She's creating false memories, imagining persecution where none exists. So the bruises I saw, she falls, Willa interrupted smoothly. Constantly. She's unsteady on her feet, refuses to use a walker, and when she falls, she bruises easily because of her age and medication. Every time it happens, I help her up, I comfort her, and then later she forgets the fall and decides I must have pushed her. The lie was so smooth, so plausible, delivered with such conviction that Alvin understood how she'd fooled so many people. If he hadn't seen the surveillance footage, hadn't read the text messages, he might have been tempted to believe her. And Marcus helped you set up this power of attorney to deal with all this? Alvin asked. Yes. Willa relaxed slightly, perhaps thinking she was getting through to him. Marcus has been wonderful. He understands how difficult these situations can be for families. He's helped me navigate the legal complexities of caring for an elderly person who's losing their grip on reality. He sounds like more than just an attorney, Alvin said carefully. The phone records show you've talked to him hundreds of times. Willa went very still. You looked at my phone records? The police did. They showed them to me. For a long moment, Willa said nothing. Alvin could see her recalculating, trying to determine how much he knew, how much he'd been told. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Not much, just a slight shift from defensive to something more calculating. Marcus and I have become close, she admitted. This situation with your mother has been incredibly stressful, Alvin. You're never here. I needed someone to talk to, someone who understood what I was going through. Marcus has been that person. How close? Willa's eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw a flash of the real person beneath the mask. Does it matter? You're married to your career, Alvin. You always have been. We haven't had a real marriage in over a year. I was lonely, and Marcus was there. So you're having an affair with the lawyer who's helping you gain control over my mother's estate. Alvin let the statement hang in the air. That seems like a conflict of interest. It's not like that, Willa said, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. Marcus and I, we connected over our shared concern for your mother's welfare. The relationship developed naturally from there. Naturally. Alvin repeated. And did it naturally develop into planning what would happen after my mother signed over control of her assets? Willa's expression shuddered. What are you implying? I'm asking what the plan was, Willa. Once you had power of attorney, once you had control of my mother's properties, her bank accounts, her investments, what was supposed to happen then? She was going to be placed in a care facility where she could get proper treatment, Willa said carefully. Somewhere with trained staff who could handle her condition. It was all for her benefit. And the $2 million in assets she has? That was going to stay in her name? Of course. They would be used for her care. Don't lie to me. Alvin's voice hardened. I found the text messages, Willa. The ones you thought you'd deleted. I know about the shell companies. I know about the plan to transfer the properties. I know everything. The mask finally cracked. Willa's face went through a series of micro-expressions. Shock, fury, fear, calculation, before settling into something cold and hard. If you know everything, she said slowly, then you know your mother was standing in the way of our future. She was a burden, Alvin. A drain on your time, your money, your energy. I was trying to free you from that burden. By stealing from her? By liquidating assets that were just sitting there, doing nothing, while you worked yourself to death to support everyone. Willa's voice rose slightly. Your mother has more money than she could spend in 3 lifetimes. Why shouldn't we benefit from that? Why shouldn't we build a future together using resources that she doesn't even need? Because it's her money, Alvin said. Because she earned it. Because my father left it to her, not to us. Willa laughed, a bitter sound without humor. Your father. Your saintly father who built those rental properties through decades of hard work. Do you know what your mother planned to do with all of it? Leave it to charity. Charity, Alvin. She was going to give away millions of dollars to strangers instead of to you, her own son. I was trying to prevent that. Marcus and I were trying to secure your inheritance before she gave it all away. Marcus, Alvin said. Tell me about Marcus's role in all this. What exactly did he do? He provided the legal framework, Willa said, and Alvin could hear her sliding into justification mode. The natural human instinct to explain, to make someone understand. He knew how to structure things so everything looked legitimate. The power of attorney, the property transfers, the care facility placement. It all had to be done correctly, or someone might challenge it later. And after my mother was in the facility, after the assets were transferred, what was the next step? Willa's eyes narrowed. Why are you asking questions you already know the answers to? Because I want to hear you say it, Alvin said. I want to hear you admit what you were planning. Your mother was going to have an accident, Willa said flatly, all pretense finally abandoned. A medication error. These things happen in care facilities all the time. Overworked nurses, confusing prescriptions, elderly patients who don't understand dosing. No one would question it. Marcus has connections. People who work in these places. People who can make things happen without leaving evidence. Alvin's hands clenched on the arms of his chair. You were going to murder her. I was going to free both of us from a burden that was only going to get worse, Willa corrected. Your mother is 72 years old, Alvin. How many more years do you think she has? 5? 10? Why should we wait for nature to take its course when we could accelerate the inevitable and benefit from it? And then what? After my mother was dead? Willa smiled, and it was the coldest expression Alvin had ever seen on a human face. Then you would inherit everything as her only child. And as your wife, I would have access to all of it. Marcus and I would split everything 70-30. I'd take the larger share since I did all the hard work of dealing with your mother. Except I wasn't supposed to be around to inherit, was I? Alvin said quietly. The text messages mentioned a phase 2, something about accidents happening on business trips. Willa's smile didn't falter. You travel constantly, Alvin, to dangerous places sometimes, hotels in countries with questionable safety standards, rental cars on unfamiliar roads, muggings, fires, accidents. These things happen to American businessmen abroad more often than you'd think. And when they do, the grieving widow inherits everything. You were going to kill me, too. I was going to free myself, Willa said. From this sham of a marriage, from playing the dutiful wife while you ignored me, from pretending to care about your boring business and your pathetic mother, Marcus and I were going to disappear, start over somewhere beautiful with money to do whatever we wanted. It was perfect. It would have been perfect if you hadn't come home early. In the kitchen, James Crawford was already moving, officers behind him. Sarah Lynn, listening through the receiver, was speaking rapidly into her radio. Across town, a tactical team was approaching Marcus Reynolds's office building. Just one more question, Alvin said, his voice barely above a whisper. Was any of it real? Did you ever actually care about me? Or was it all just a con from the beginning? Willa considered this, her head tilting slightly. You were a means to an end. A moderately attractive, very wealthy man who was emotionally distant enough that I could do what I needed to do without too much interference. You were never the goal, Alvin. You were just the vehicle to get me to the money. The door to the kitchen burst open, and 3 officers rushed in, James Crawford behind them. Willa Chestnut, Officer Davis announced. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, elder abuse, and attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent. Willa surged to her feet, her face contorting with rage. You bastard! You were wearing a wire! You... 2 officers grabbed her arms as she tried to lunge at Alvin. She fought them, screaming obscenities, all composure shattered as handcuffs clicked around her wrists. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law, Officer Davis continued calmly as Willa thrashed. You have the right to an attorney. I want my lawyer, Willa shrieked. I'm not saying anything else. This is entrapment. This is... They dragged her toward the door, still screaming, still fighting. Alvin stood frozen, watching the woman he'd married being hauled away in handcuffs, her true nature finally fully exposed. James put a hand on his shoulder. Breathe, he said quietly. You did it. You got her. Sarah's voice crackled through the speaker James was holding. We're going in now. Marcus Reynolds's office. Across the city, at the glass-fronted law offices of Reynolds and Associates, Marcus Reynolds was frantically feeding documents into an industrial shredder when Detective Sarah Lynn and 6 officers burst through the door with a warrant. Marcus Reynolds, freeze! Sarah shouted, her weapon drawn. Marcus looked up, his face pale, and made a split-second decision that sealed his fate. He grabbed his briefcase from his desk and ran for the back exit, documents still clutched in his hand. He made it 3 steps before 2 officers tackled him to the ground. The briefcase flew open on impact, scattering papers across the expensive carpeting. Sarah knelt and picked one up, a grim smile crossing her face. It was Donna Turner's power of attorney, signed with a forged signature, along with property transfer documents and a handwritten list of offshore account numbers. Marcus Reynolds, Sarah said, holstering her weapon as her officers hauled him to his feet. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, forgery, and about 15 other charges I'm going to enjoy reading to you. You have the right to remain silent. Back at the brownstone, Alvin was removing the wire with shaking hands when his phone rang. It was Sarah. We got him, she said. Red-handed with all the evidence we needed. He's already asking about a deal. Alvin closed his eyes. It's over? The arrests are over, Sarah corrected. The trial is just beginning. But yes, Alvin, the dangerous part is over. Your mother is safe. You're safe. And both of them are going to prison for a very long time. Alvin ended the call and looked at James, who was already on his phone with the DA's office. Through the window, he could see Patricia's house where his mother waited, safe and protected. The trap had worked perfectly. Willa and Marcus had condemned themselves with their own words, their own greed, their own arrogant belief that they were smarter than everyone else. Now all that remained was to see justice done, and Alvin intended to be there for every moment of it. The following morning, Alvin drove to his office for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, though it had only been 4 days since he'd walked in on Willa's abuse of his mother. 4 days that had fundamentally altered the landscape of his life, stripping away illusions and revealing betrayals he never could have imagined. The building looked the same, sleek glass and steel rising 30 stories above the financial district, home to Turner and Associates Consulting and a dozen other successful firms. Alvin had purchased the top 2 floors 5 years ago, when his business had finally reached the level of success he'd been chasing since his 20s. He'd been so proud the day he signed those papers, so certain that he'd built something permanent and meaningful. Now, as he rode the elevator to the 29th floor, he wondered what else in his life had been built on lies. The reception area was quiet at 7:30 in the morning, most of the staff not due in for another hour. But through the glass walls of his executive suite, Alvin could see movement in the outer office where his secretary worked. Karen Mills was there, and she was packing. Alvin's jaw tightened. He'd been planning to come in early specifically to speak with Karen before the rest of the staff arrived, before she could hear through the office grapevine what had happened with Willa. But apparently she already knew. Someone must have tipped her off. Maybe one of the officers who'd been at the house, maybe a friend at the police station. It didn't matter. What mattered was that she was trying to leave before he could confront her. He pushed open the glass door to his suite without knocking. Karen jerked around at the sound, a cardboard box half filled with personal items clutched in her hands. She was 53 years old, a woman who'd been with him for 7 years, someone he'd trusted implicitly to manage his schedule, screen his calls, and keep his professional life running smoothly while he focused on clients and strategy. She had graying hair cut in a practical bob, glasses that were always sliding down her nose, and a collection of cardigans that she rotated through like a uniform. Right now, her face was blotchy and tear-streaked, and her hands were shaking. "Alvin?" she said, her voice cracking. "I didn't expect you this early." Clearly. Alvin closed the door behind him and leaned against it, blocking her exit. "Going somewhere?" I heard about what happened with your wife and your mother, and I thought it might be better if I—" She couldn't seem to finish the sentence. "Better if you disappeared before I found out you'd been helping Willa?" Alvin said flatly. Karen's face crumpled. She set the box down on her desk with trembling hands and sank into her chair, covering her face. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm so So sorry. Alvin felt rage burning in his chest, white hot and barely controlled. This woman, whom he'd given a generous salary and excellent benefits, whom he'd trusted with the most intimate details of his schedule and business, had betrayed him, had enabled his mother's abuse, had taken money to keep him ignorant while Donna suffered. Why? The word came out harsh and unforgiving. Why would you do this? Karen looked up at him, mascara running down her cheeks. She offered me money, $500 a month, cash, and I needed it, Alvin. My husband lost his job last year. Our mortgage is underwater. Our daughter's college tuition. She choked on a sob. I know it's not an excuse. I know what I did was wrong. But I was desperate, and $500 meant I could keep the lights on, keep food on the table. What exactly did she pay you to do? Alvin's voice was ice. I want to hear all of it. Karen wiped at her face with shaking hands. She approached me last February. She came to the office one day when you were in a meeting, said she wanted to talk to me about a sensitive family matter. We went to that coffee shop downstairs, and she told me your mother was having some adjustment issues living with you, that she was getting confused and paranoid, making accusations that weren't true. And you believed her. She was very convincing, Karen said miserably. She showed me texts from your mother that seemed erratic, confused. She said your mother had accused her of stealing, of poisoning her food, all sorts of wild things. She said the doctors thought it might be early dementia, and that you were too emotionally invested to see it clearly. Alvin's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Those texts were probably fake, or taken out of context. My mother doesn't have dementia. I know that now, Karen whispered. But at the time it seemed plausible. Your mother is in her 70s, and Willa seemed genuinely concerned. She said she was trying to protect you from the stress of dealing with it while you were working so hard to grow the business. What did she ask you to do? Karen took a shuddering breath. She said your mother might try to call you with more wild accusations, and that it would be better if those calls didn't get through because they just upset you and distracted you from work. She asked me to screen calls from your mother, from neighbors, from anyone who might be calling about your mother. And you agreed, for $500 a month. Yes. The admission was barely audible. She started paying me in March, cash in an envelope delivered to my apartment mailbox the first of every month. No paper trail, no record, just an envelope with $500 bills. Alvin felt sick. How many calls did you intercept? I don't know exactly. Maybe 20? 30? Karen's voice was shaking. Your mother called 4 or 5 times. She always sounded upset, asking for you, saying she needed to talk to you urgently. I told her you were in meetings or traveling or couldn't be disturbed. I told her to work things out with Willa. Mrs. Monroe called, Alvin said, remembering Patricia's testimony. Multiple times. She told you it was urgent, that it was about my mother. Karen nodded miserably. 6 times. She was very persistent. The first few times I just gave her the standard excuses. But after the 3rd or 4th call, Willa told me to be more firm. So I told Mrs. Monroe that you'd specifically instructed me that family matters should be handled by your wife, that you didn't want to be bothered about your mother's adjustment issues. You lied to her. You made it sound like I knew what was happening and didn't care. Yes, Karen whispered. And there were other calls too. A doctor's office called twice asking to speak with you about your mother's care. I told them to contact Willa. Someone from Adult Protective Services called once. I think a neighbor must have reported concerns, and I told them you were out of the country and referred them to Willa. Alvin's vision actually blurred with rage. Someone from Adult Protective Services had tried to reach him, had tried to investigate what was happening to his mother, and Karen had blocked that call. If APS had gotten through to him, this could have ended months ago. His mother could have been saved months of suffering. "What else?" he demanded. "What else did you do?" "Willa asked for your schedule," Karen said, her voice breaking completely now. "Your detailed schedule. When you'd be traveling, when you'd be in late meetings, when you'd be unreachable. She said she wanted to plan family dinners around your availability. Wanted to make sure she wasn't bothering you during important work times. I gave her access to your calendar. Everything. Every trip, every meeting, every gap in your schedule." The implications crashed over Alvin like a wave. Willa hadn't wanted his schedule to plan dinners. She'd wanted it so she'd know exactly when she could escalate the abuse without risk of being discovered. When she could lock Donna in her room without Alvin coming home unexpectedly. When she could withhold food, break bones, dump garbage, terrorize his mother without fear of interruption. "You enabled everything," Alvin said, his voice hollow. "Every beating, every instance of cruelty, every moment my mother spent terrified and alone, you made it possible by keeping me in the dark." "I didn't know." Karen's voice rose desperately. "I swear to you, Alvin, I didn't know what she was really doing. I thought your mother was confused. I thought Willa was a stressed caregiver dealing with a difficult situation. I thought I was helping by keeping you focused on work instead of worrying about family drama. I never imagined." "You never imagined because you never asked." Alvin cut her off. "You took the money and did what you were told, and never once questioned whether you were doing the right thing." "Mrs. Monroe came to this office in person, Karen. She came all the way down here because she was that worried about my mother, and you turned her away. You told her I didn't want to be bothered." Karen was sobbing now, her whole body shaking. I know what I did. When I heard the news yesterday about Willa's arrest, about what she'd been doing, I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I've been throwing up since last night. I came in early to pack my things before anyone else arrived because I couldn't face you, couldn't face what I'd done." "Did Willa tell you about her plan?" Alvin asked. "Did she tell you she was going to murder my mother and steal her estate?" "No!" Karen looked up, horrified. "God, no. If I'd known anything like that, I would have gone to the police. I would never have—" She broke off, shaking her head frantically. "She told me it was just about managing a difficult situation with an elderly woman who was getting confused. She never said anything about theft or violence or—" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Murder." Alvin studied her face, looking for signs of deception, but all he saw was genuine horror and soul-deep regret. Karen had been greedy and willfully blind, but she probably hadn't known the full scope of Willa's plan. She'd been a tool, used and manipulated just like everyone else. It didn't make what she'd done forgivable. "You're fired," Alvin said flatly. "Effective immediately. Clear out your desk within the hour. You'll receive 2 weeks severance pay, more than you deserve. But that's it. No letter of recommendation. No good reference if anyone calls. You'll be lucky if I don't sue you for breach of fiduciary duty." Karen nodded, not even trying to argue. "I understand. I deserve that. I deserve worse than that." "You're also going to speak with the police and the district attorney's office," Alvin continued. "You're going to tell them everything you just told me, every call you intercepted, every piece of information you gave to Willa, Every payment you received. All of it. You're going to provide evidence that will help convict her and her co-conspirator. Of course, Karen said quickly. Whatever they need, I'll tell them everything. I'll testify if they want me to. Her voice broke again. I'll do whatever I can to make this right, even though I know I can never really make it right. Alvin pulled out his phone and dialed James Crawford's number. The attorney answered on the second ring. I'm at my office, Alvin said without preamble. My secretary, Karen Mills, was part of this. She took money from Willa to intercept calls and provide my schedule. She's willing to give a statement and testify. Can you send someone to take her statement and coordinate with the DA? I'll have someone there in 30 minutes, James said. Don't let her leave. I won't. Alvin ended the call and looked at Karen, who was still slumped in her chair, crying quietly. An attorney will be here in half an hour to take your official statement. Until then, you sit right there and don't move. Alvin, Karen said, her voice thick with tears. I know this doesn't mean anything, and I know you'll never believe me. But I am truly sorry. I will regret what I did for the rest of my life. I will never forgive myself for the role I played in hurting your mother. You're right, Alvin said coldly. It doesn't mean anything. Sorry doesn't undo months of abuse. Sorry doesn't give my mother back the nights she spent terrified and alone. Sorry doesn't erase the trauma she'll carry for the rest of her life. He turned to leave, then paused at the door and looked back. I trusted you, Karen. For 7 years, I trusted you with my schedule, my business, my life. And you sold that trust for $500 a month. I hope it was worth it. He left her there, sobbing into her hands, and walked through the empty office to his own private space. He sank into his leather chair and stared out the window at the city skyline, at the buildings full of people going about their lives, unaware of how quickly everything could fall apart, how easily trust could be shattered, how the people closest to you could betray you for nothing more than pocket change. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Lynn. DA wants to add obstruction of justice charges against Karen Mills. Need your permission to proceed. Alvin typed back without hesitation. Permission granted. Throw the book at her. Another text, this time from James. Marcus Reynolds is trying to make a deal. Says he'll testify against Willa in exchange for a reduced sentence. DA is considering it. Alvin stared at that message for a long moment. Part of him wanted to tell them no, wanted to insist that both Willa and Marcus face maximum penalties with no deals. But the pragmatic part of his brain knew that Marcus's testimony could seal Willa's fate, could ensure she spent decades in prison instead of potentially getting a lighter sentence if she mounted a good defense. He typed back, whatever gets Willa the longest possible sentence, that's the priority. Through the glass walls, he could see other employees starting to arrive, greeting each other in the break room, settling into their workstations. None of them knew yet about Karen's betrayal, about Willa's arrest, about the conspiracy that had been operating right under their noses. They would find out soon enough. News like this didn't stay secret for long. His phone rang again. This time it was Patricia. Alvin, honey, your mother wants to talk to you. Are you at the office? Yes. Is she okay? She's been very quiet this morning. I think she's processing everything. But she asked if you could come by when you have time. She said there's something she needs to tell you. I'll be there in an hour, Alvin promised. After I finish up here. He ended the call and looked around his office at all the trappings of success he'd accumulated. The awards on the walls, the expensive furniture, the view of the city. He'd sacrificed so much for this. Time with his mother, attention to his personal life, relationships. He'd been so focused on building his empire that he'd left his home vulnerable to predators. Never again. When James's associate arrived to take Karen's statement, Alvin stood at his office window and watched as his former secretary was escorted out of the building. Her box of personal items under her arm, her face hidden behind sunglasses. She would face obstruction of justice charges, would probably lose her home, her marriage, her future. The $500 a month had cost her everything, but it had cost his mother more, and for that, Alvin would never forgive her. The courthouse was a massive granite building in the heart of downtown, its columns and steps designed to evoke the weight and permanence of justice. Alvin had been here before for business disputes and contract negotiations, but never for anything like this. Never for something so personal, so visceral, so absolutely critical to his life and his mother's safety. He climbed the steps beside James Crawford, both men dressed in dark suits that conveyed seriousness and respectability. Behind them came Patricia Monroe, wearing her Sunday best, a navy dress and pearls, and Dr. Michael Harper in a gray suit that looked like it had been pulled from the back of his closet for the occasion. They were the witnesses, the people who would stand up in court and tell the truth about what Willa Chestnut and Marcus Reynolds had done. Detective Sarah Lynn met them at the security checkpoint, her badge getting them through faster than the general public line. "The arraignment is in courtroom 4B, she said as they collected their belongings from the scanner. Judge Patricia Okonkwo is presiding. She's fair but tough, and she doesn't tolerate manipulation or theatrics." "That's good for us." "What about their attorneys?" James asked. "Willa has Bernard Klein, expensive, slick, specializes in making guilty people look sympathetic. Marcus has Jennifer Torres, also expensive, also very good. They're both going to argue for bail, probably claim their clients are upstanding citizens with no criminal records who pose no flight risk." "Except they do pose a flight risk," Alvin said. "The text messages mentioned the Caymans, mentioned countries without extradition treaties." "I know," Sarah said, "and the judge will hear that. Trust the process, Alvin. We have evidence most prosecutors only dream of." Courtroom 4B was smaller than Alvin expected, with rows of wooden benches for observers, a jury box that sat empty for this hearing, and the judge's bench elevated at the front. The seal of the state hung on the wall behind the bench, and everything smelled faintly of old wood and floor polish. Alvin took a seat in the front row behind the prosecutor's table. Assistant District Attorney Michael Chen was already there, a young man in his 30s with sharp eyes and a reputation for being meticulous. He'd met with Alvin twice in the past week, going over every detail of the case, and had assured him that the evidence was overwhelming. "All rise," the bailiff announced, as Judge Okonkwo entered through a side door. She was a tall woman in her 50s, her dark skin contrasting sharply with her black robes, her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. She settled into her seat and surveyed the courtroom with an expression that suggested she'd seen everything and been impressed by very little. "Be seated," she said. "We're here for the arraignment of Willa Chestnut and Marcus Reynolds. Bailiff, bring in the defendants." A door at the side of the courtroom opened, and Willa was led in first. Alvin had steeled himself for this moment, but actually seeing her still hit him like a punch to the gut. She was wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hands shackled in front of her, her ankles connected by a short chain that forced her to take shuffling steps. Her hair, usually so perfectly styled, was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore no makeup, and the harsh fluorescent lights revealed lines around her eyes and mouth that he'd never noticed before. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, though her expression remained carefully neutral. Her attorney, Bernard Klein, stood and greeted her as she was positioned at the defense table. He was exactly what Sarah had described: expensive suit, polished shoes, the kind of confidence that came from winning cases that seemed unwinnable. Marcus Reynolds was brought in next, also in shackles, also in orange. He looked worse than Willa. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed like he hadn't slept, and his hands were visibly shaking. His attorney, Jennifer Torres, touched his arm in what might have been reassurance or warning. "Ms. Chestnut and Mr. Reynolds," Judge Okonkwo said, looking at them over her reading glasses, "you've been charged with multiple counts of elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and various related offenses. How do you plead?" Bernard Klein stood smoothly. "Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty to all charges. Furthermore, we request that Ms. Chestnut be released on her own recognizance pending trial. She has no prior criminal record, strong ties to the community, and poses no flight risk." "Not guilty, Your Honor," Marcus's attorney said when it was her turn. "And we also request bail. Mr. Reynolds is a licensed attorney with the established practice and no criminal history. He has every incentive to appear for trial and no reason to flee." Ada Chen stood, his expression skeptical. "Your Honor, the state strongly opposes bail for both defendants. The evidence in this case shows a calculated conspiracy to defraud and murder an elderly woman for financial gain. Text messages between the defendants explicitly discuss fleeing to countries without extradition treaties once their plan was complete. They are absolutely flight risks." "Your Honor," Bernard Klein interjected smoothly, "those text messages are being taken out of context. They were fantasies, hypothetical discussions, not actual plans. My client has lived in this city her entire adult life. She's not going anywhere." "Fantasies?" Judge Okonkwo's eyebrows rose. "Mr. Klein, I've reviewed the evidence presented to the grand jury. These weren't fantasies. These were detailed plans including specific offshore accounts, property transfer documents, and discussions of murder-for-hire contacts. Do you really want me to believe your client was just daydreaming?" Klein opened his mouth, then closed it, apparently deciding that particular argument wasn't going to work with this judge. Judge Okonkwo turned her attention to the case file in front of her. "I've read the preliminary evidence, and I've read the arguments from both sides. The charges here are serious, among the most serious that come before this court. We're not just talking about fraud. We're talking about a systematic campaign of abuse against a vulnerable elderly woman, combined with conspiracy to commit murder. Not one murder, but potentially two. As the evidence suggests, the defendants also planned to kill the victim's son." Willa's face remained impassive, but Alvin saw Marcus flinch. "The state has presented evidence of forged documents, surveillance footage of physical abuse, text messages discussing murder plots, and testimony from multiple witnesses," the judge continued. "The defendants had access to significant financial resources through their planned theft of the victim's estate, resources that could easily facilitate flight to a non-extradition country." She looked directly at Willa, then at Marcus. "Bail is denied for both defendants. They will remain in custody pending trial. Given the severity and complexity of the charges, trial is set for 3 months from today. Next case." Bernard Klein tried to object, but Judge Okonkwo was already moving on. The bailiffs stepped forward to escort Willa and Marcus out. For just a moment, as Willa was being turned toward the door, her eyes found Alvin's. There was no remorse there, no regret, just cold calculation and something that might have been fury at being caught. Then she was gone, shuffling out in her shackles, and the courtroom moved on to the next case as if the drama of the past few minutes had never happened. The preliminary hearing came 2 weeks later, a necessary step to determine if there was enough evidence to proceed to trial. By now, the media had gotten hold of the story, and the courthouse steps were crowded with reporters shouting questions as Alvin and his group made their way inside. "Mr. Turner, how do you feel about your wife's arrest? Did you know your mother was being abused? Are you divorcing Willa Chestnut?" Alvin kept his head down and let James handle the brief statement they'd prepared. Mr. Turner is focused on his mother's recovery and on seeing justice done. He has full confidence in the district attorney's office and in the legal system. That's all we have to say at this time. The preliminary hearing was more involved than the arraignment. This time, there was a court reporter taking down every word, and Ada Chen called witnesses to establish the basic facts of the case. Patricia Monroe was the first to take the stand. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, then settled into the witness chair with the kind of dignity that only came with age and experience. Chen walked her through her testimony gently but thoroughly. Patricia described the sounds she'd heard through the walls, the screaming, the crying, the crashes. She described seeing Willa push Donna, seeing her drag Donna into the house. She described her attempts to call Alvin, only to be turned away by his secretary. "Mrs. Monroe," Chen asked, "in your observation, was Mrs. Turner afraid of the defendant?" "Terrified," Patricia said firmly. "I've known Donna Turner for 30 years. I've seen her face down aggressive dogs, talk down angry neighbors, stand up to insurance companies and bureaucrats. I have never seen her afraid of anything or anyone, until Willa Chestnut. That woman made Donna afraid to exist in her own son's house." Bernard Klein tried to shake her testimony on cross-examination, suggesting that Patricia might have misinterpreted what she saw, that perhaps Donna had been unsteady and Willa was simply trying to help her. But Patricia was unshakable. "Young man," she said, fixing Klein with a look that probably made him feel like a child being scolded, "I know the difference between helping someone and hurting them, and I know what I saw. That woman was cruel to Donna Turner, and no amount of fancy lawyer talk is going to make me say otherwise." Several people in the gallery actually smiled at that, and Klein wisely decided not to push further. Dr. Michael Harper was next, and his testimony was clinical and devastating. He walked the court through his examination of Donna, describing each injury in medical terms that somehow made them sound even worse than they'd looked. The patient presented with multiple contusions in various stages of healing, indicating repeated trauma over an extended period, he testified, referring to his notes. The wrist fracture was particularly concerning. It had healed improperly due to lack of medical treatment, and the pattern was consistent with a defensive injury, the kind sustained when someone puts their hand out to break a fall or protect themselves from a blow. He described the malnutrition, the dehydration, the psychological trauma. "In my professional opinion," he concluded, "Mrs. Turner was subjected to systematic physical and psychological abuse over a period of at least 4 months, possibly longer. The severity and consistency of the injuries indicate this was not accidental or the result of simple neglect, but rather deliberate and calculated cruelty." Marcus's attorney tried to suggest that perhaps Donna's injuries were self-inflicted or the result of normal aging, but Dr. Harper shut that down immediately. "I've been practicing medicine for 40 years," he said. "I know what normal aging looks like, and I know what abuse looks like. Mrs. Turner was abused. There is no doubt in my mind." The most powerful testimony, however, came from Donna herself, though she wasn't physically present in the courtroom. Due to the trauma she'd experienced and her ongoing recovery, the judge had allowed her to provide a videotape deposition rather than requiring her to appear in person. The courtroom went silent as the screen was wheeled in and the video began to play. Donna appeared on screen, seated in a comfortable chair in what looked like a therapist's office. She was wearing a soft blue cardigan, and her silver hair had been neatly styled. She looked thin, still, fragile, but her eyes were clear and her voice was steady as she was sworn in by the court reporter who'd traveled to record her testimony. Ada Chen appeared on screen, sitting across from her. "Mrs. Turner, thank you for agreeing to provide this testimony. I know this is difficult for you." "It's necessary," Donna said simply. "People need to know what happened. Other elderly people need to know they're not alone if they're going through something similar." Over the next 40 minutes, Donna walked through her experience with Willa. She described the gradual escalation, how it started with cutting remarks and cold shoulders, then progressed to withholding food, then to physical violence. She described being locked in her room for hours, sometimes overnight. She described the threats, the manipulation, the constant fear. "She told me no one would believe me," Donna said, her voice steady despite the tears sliding down her cheeks. "She said I was old, that people would think I was confused or had dementia. She said if I told Alvin, she'd make sure I was put in a facility where I'd never see him again. She said she'd tell the doctors I was violent, that I'd attacked her, and they'd lock me up in the psychiatric ward." "Were you afraid of her?" Chen asked gently. "Every day," Donna said. "Every single day. I was afraid to eat because I didn't know if she'd put something in my food. I was afraid to sleep because I didn't know if she'd hurt me while I was unconscious. I was afraid to call my son because I knew she was watching me, listening, and that she'd punish me for it later." "Mrs. Turner, in your own words, what do you think would have happened if your son hadn't come home early that day?" Donna looked directly into the camera, directly at the judge who would be watching this testimony, and said clearly, "She would have killed me. Maybe not that day or that week, but eventually. She would have made me sign those papers giving her control of my money, and then she would have killed me and made it look like an accident. I know that as surely as I know my own name." The video ended, and the courtroom remained silent for a long moment. Even Bernard Klein, who'd been taking notes throughout, had stopped writing. Judge Okonkwo removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. "I've seen a lot of cases in my years on the bench," she said finally. "But the level of premeditation and cruelty displayed here is extraordinary. Based on the testimony and evidence presented, I find there is more than sufficient cause to proceed to trial on all charges. The defendants will remain in custody. We're adjourned." As they filed out of the courtroom, Alvin felt Patricia take his arm. "Your mother is so strong," she said quietly. "Stronger than any of us knew." Alvin nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He'd watched his mother on that screen describing months of terror and abuse, and he'd been struck by her composure, her clarity, her determination to see justice done. She had survived. Despite everything Willa had done to break her, Donna Turner had survived. And now she was fighting back. The trial was still 3 months away, but after today, Alvin had no doubt about the outcome. Willa and Marcus would pay for what they'd done. Justice slow and methodical as it was finally coming. The trial began on a cold Monday morning in October, 3 months after Willa and Marcus's arrest. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the back rows, sketch artists positioned themselves for the best angles, and curious observers who'd followed the case in the media crowded into every available seat. Alvin sat in the front row, directly behind the prosecution table, flanked by Patricia Monroe on one side and James Crawford on the other. Dr. Harper was there too, along with Detective Sarah Lynn, who'd been instrumental in building the case. Donna was not in the courtroom. She'd been excused from attending due to the trauma of facing her abusers in person, and the judge had ruled that her videotape deposition would be played for the jury instead. It was a small mercy that Alvin was grateful for. His mother had been through enough without having to sit in this room and relive her ordeal while Willa stared at her from the defense table. The jury selection had taken 2 days. Ada Chen had been meticulous, looking for people who could handle the disturbing evidence they'd be seeing while remaining objective. The final 12 jurors ranged from a retired teacher to a construction foreman to a young tech worker, a cross-section of the city that would decide Willa and Marcus's fate. Bernard Klein gave a smooth opening statement, painting Willa as a devoted wife who'd been overwhelmed by the demands of caring for an elderly woman with declining mental faculties. He suggested that what appeared to be abuse was actually the desperate actions of an exhausted caregiver who'd reached her breaking point. He even tried to suggest that the text messages with Marcus had been taken out of context, that they were venting and fantasy rather than actual plans. Jennifer Torres, Marcus's attorney, took a different approach. She portrayed her client as a professional who'd been seduced and manipulated by Willa, drawn into a scheme that spiraled beyond his control. She painted him as a victim of sorts, a man who'd made terrible mistakes, but who'd never actually intended to hurt anyone. But when Ada Chen stood to give his opening statement, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. He didn't raise his voice or use theatrical gestures. He simply laid out the facts, the surveillance footage, the text messages, the forged documents, the medical evidence, the testimony from witnesses. He presented a timeline that showed premeditation stretching back months, a conspiracy that was methodical and calculated. "This isn't a case about a stressed caregiver," Chen said, looking each juror in the eye. "This is a case about greed, cruelty, and attempted murder. The defendants saw an elderly woman with substantial assets, and they decided to steal everything she had. And when theft wasn't enough, when they realized she might recover or fight back or tell someone the truth, they planned to kill her. They planned to kill her son, too. They put it in writing. They discussed the specific methods. They looked up offshore accounts to hide the money. This wasn't a fantasy. This was a blueprint for murder." The trial lasted 3 weeks. Chen built his case witness by witness, piece by piece, creating a narrative so damning that even Alvin, who knew all the details, found himself shocked by the cumulative weight of the evidence. Patricia testified about what she'd witnessed and heard. Dr. Harper walked the jury through Donna's injuries with enlarged photographs that made several jurors visibly uncomfortable. Rodriguez, the tech specialist, explained how the surveillance cameras had been installed and played clips of footage that showed Willa's abuse in stark, undeniable detail. The footage was hardest to watch. Alvin had seen it before, but watching it again in a silent courtroom, seeing the jurors' faces as they witnessed Willa shove his mother, lock her in her room, withhold food, verbally berate her, it was almost unbearable. One older woman on the jury was openly crying by the time the footage ended. The text messages were read into the record, each one more damning than the last. The jury heard Willa and Marcus discuss breaking Donna down psychologically. They heard them plan the forged power of attorney. They heard them discuss murder methods and escape plans. They heard Willa say explicitly that Alvin was next on the list once Donna was dead. Tony Santos testified about the financial investigation, showing how Marcus had a pattern of stealing from elderly clients. Investigators had uncovered 3 other cases where elderly people had signed over power of attorney to Marcus under suspicious circumstances, only to die shortly thereafter, with their estates substantially depleted. While Marcus hadn't been charged with those deaths, the evidence wasn't quite strong enough. The pattern established his modus operandi. Karen Mills testified on day 8, her voice shaking as she admitted to blocking calls and providing Willa with Alvin's schedule. She broke down on the stand, apologizing repeatedly, but her testimony was crucial in showing how Willa had systematically isolated Donna and prevented anyone from discovering the abuse. Willa and Marcus did not testify in their own defense. Their attorneys had advised against it. There was too much evidence to refute, too many lies that would be exposed under cross-examination. Instead, Klein and Torres called character witnesses who testified that their clients had always seemed like good people. Responsible citizens who'd never been in trouble before. But character witnesses couldn't compete with surveillance footage and text messages. Donna's videotaped deposition was played on day 14. The courtroom was completely silent as her image appeared on the screen, as she described in calm, clear language what Willa had done to her. When she said, "She would have killed me," one of the male jurors actually flinched. On day 16, after 3 days of closing arguments and jury instructions, the jury was sent to deliberate. Alvin and his group moved to a nearby conference room that Chen had arranged for them to wait in. The conventional wisdom was that a quick verdict usually favored the prosecution. It meant the evidence was so overwhelming that there wasn't much to debate. 4 hours later, the bailiff called them back. The jury had reached a verdict. Alvin's hands were shaking as he took his seat. Patricia reached over and squeezed his hand. James sat perfectly still beside him, his expression unreadable. Willa and Marcus were brought back in, both looking pale and drawn. 3 weeks in jail had taken a visible toll. Willa's hair had lost its shine, and Marcus looked like he'd aged 10 years. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Okonkwo asked. The jury foreman, a middle-aged black woman who worked as an accountant, stood. "We have, Your Honor." "What say you?" "On the charge of elder abuse in the first degree, we find the defendant Willa Chestnut guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of attempted theft," the foreman continued through all 12 counts against Willa. "Guilty on every single one." Alvin heard Patricia let out a small sob of relief beside him. His own chest felt tight, like he couldn't quite get enough air. The foreman moved on to Marcus's charges. Guilty on conspiracy to commit fraud. Guilty on conspiracy to commit murder. Guilty on corruption. Guilty on forgery. The list went on. Guilty. 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 When the foreman finally sat down, Willa was staring straight ahead, her face blank. Marcus had his head down, his shoulders shaking. Their attorneys sat in stunned silence. They'd clearly expected at least some of the charges to be dropped or reduced by the jury. Judge Okonkwo scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later, then dismissed the jury with thanks for their service. As Willa and Marcus were led away in handcuffs, Willa's eyes found Alvin's one last time. There was nothing there now. No anger, no calculation, no emotion at all. Just emptiness. The sentencing hearing was shorter, more procedural. Both Willa and Marcus had the opportunity to make statements, but both declined on advice of their attorneys. Alvin was given the opportunity to present a victim impact statement, but he decided to let Donna's recorded testimony speak for itself. Judge Okonkwo reviewed the pre-sentencing reports, the severity of the crimes, and the defendant's lack of prior criminal history. Then she delivered her sentences with the same firm clarity she'd shown throughout the trial. Willa Chestnut, you are sentenced to 12 years in state prison on the combined charges of elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and attempted theft. You will be eligible for parole after serving 85% of your sentence. You are also ordered to pay restitution to the victim in the amount of $50,000 for medical expenses and emotional distress. 12 years. Willa would be 48 years old when she was released. Her youth gone, her beauty faded, her life irrevocably altered. Marcus Reynolds, you are sentenced to 18 years in state prison on the combined charges of conspiracy to commit fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, corruption, and related offenses. You will be eligible for parole after serving 85% of your sentence. Your law license is permanently revoked, and you are ordered to pay restitution totaling $300,000 to multiple victims of your fraudulent schemes. 18 years. Marcus would be 60 years old, his career destroyed, his life in ruins. Karen Mills had been sentenced separately a week earlier. 2 years of probation, 300 hours of community service, and a permanent mark on her record that would make finding employment nearly impossible. It was a lighter sentence than Alvin had wanted, but Chen had explained that her cooperation had been valuable, and she'd shown genuine remorse. As the bailiffs led Willa and Marcus away for the last time, Alvin felt something release in his chest. It was over. The trial, the waiting, the constant anxiety. It was finally over. Justice had been served, slow and imperfect as it was, but served nonetheless. 6 months later, on a warm April evening, Alvin pulled his car into the parking lot of Sunrise Gardens Assisted Living Community. It was a beautiful facility, nothing like the prison-like nursing homes that had once terrified Donna. The building was modern and bright, with large windows and well-maintained gardens. Residents had their own apartments, their own space, their own autonomy. There were activities and social events, therapy sessions and medical care, but everything was designed to preserve dignity and independence. Donna had moved in 4 months ago, after spending time in a transitional care facility working with therapists to process her trauma. The decision had been hers. She'd told Alvin that she needed to live somewhere that felt safe, where she could be around other people, where she didn't have to be alone with her memories in the house where Willa had hurt her. Alvin had sold the brownstone immediately after the trial. He couldn't stand to be in it anymore, couldn't walk through those rooms without seeing his mother on the kitchen floor, hearing her cries, remembering his own willful blindness. He'd moved into a smaller apartment closer to his office, and he'd made changes to his work life that his younger self would have thought impossible. He left the office by 4 p.m. 4 days a week now. No exceptions, no excuses. His business had adjusted. It turned out the world didn't end if he wasn't available 24/7. His clients adapted, his employees stepped up, and his revenue had actually increased because he was making better decisions when he wasn't running on exhaustion and guilt. And 4 days a week, he drove to Sunrise Gardens to have dinner with his mother. He signed in at the front desk. Security was tight here, which gave him peace of mind, and took the elevator to the 3rd floor. Donna's apartment was at the end of the hall, number 312, and her door was decorated with a cheerful wreath she'd made in one of her craft classes. He knocked, and her voice called out, "Come in, baby." Donna's apartment was bright and welcoming, filled with her favorite things: photos on the walls, plants on the windowsill, the comfortable chair where she liked to read. She was sitting at her small dining table with photo albums spread out in front of her, and when she looked up at him, her smile was genuine and warm. She looked so much better than she had 6 months ago. She'd gained back the weight she'd lost, the bruises and injuries had healed, and the haunted look had faded from her eyes. She was still in therapy, still processing the trauma, but she was healing. Really healing. "Hey, Mama," Alvin said, setting down the takeout bags he'd brought, her favorite Thai food from the restaurant she liked. "What are you looking at?" "Old pictures," Donna said, gesturing to the albums. "I found these in storage and had Patricia bring them over. Look at this one. You must have been 5 years old." Alvin sat beside her and looked at the photograph. A younger version of himself, gap-toothed and grinning, sitting on his father's shoulders. His mother stood beside them, beautiful and strong, her hand resting on her husband's arm. "You were so happy then," Donna said softly. "We all were," Alvin agreed. They spent the evening looking through photos and eating pad thai, laughing at old haircuts and remembered family trips. It was peaceful, normal, the kind of evening they should have been having all along instead of being separated by his work and Willa's lies. As the sun set outside the window, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Donna closed the last album and looked at her son with tears in her eyes. "You came home just in time, baby," she said quietly. "You saved me." Alvin felt his own throat tighten. "No, Mama. You saved me. You survived. You held on until I could find you. And then you fought back with everything you had. You testified. You made sure they couldn't hurt anyone else. You saved yourself, and you saved me from being the man who was too busy to notice his mother was dying right in front of him." Donna reached over and took his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "We saved each other then," she said. "How about that?" "Yeah," Alvin said, squeezing back. "How about that?" They sat in comfortable silence as the light faded, mother and son, both scarred but both healing, both learning to build a new normal from the wreckage of betrayal and pain. Outside, the world continued on, people going to work, building careers, chasing success. But inside apartment 312, in this small space filled with love and old photographs, Alvin Turner had finally found what he'd been searching for all along: home, peace, connection, and the certain knowledge that his mother was safe, that justice had been served, and that no one would ever hurt her again. It wasn't the ending he'd imagined when he married Willa, when he bought that brownstone, when he built his business empire. But it was the ending that mattered. And it was enough. Alvin Turner's nightmare began the day he came home early and discovered the truth. But it ended with justice served and a relationship restored, stronger than it had ever been before. His mother's courage in the face of systematic abuse, his determination to protect her at all costs, and the community of people who refused to look away when something was wrong. All of it came together to stop two predators who thought they were untouchable. Willa and Marcus are behind bars now, paying for their greed and cruelty. Karen lost everything for $500 a month. And Donna? She's thriving, surrounded by friends, reconnected with her son, finally free from fear. But here's the question I want to leave you with. What would you do if you suspected an elderly loved one was being abused? Would you have the courage to speak up, to call repeatedly like Patricia did, to push past the barriers that abusers put in place. Elder abuse happens more often than we think, hidden behind closed doors, enabled by isolation and shame. But stories like Donna's remind us that one person speaking up, one person coming home at the right time, one person refusing to ignore the signs, it can save a life. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the elderly people in your own life, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel for more true stories of justice, courage, and survival. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, because awareness saves lives. And drop a comment below. Have you ever witnessed elder abuse? What did you do? Let's start a conversation about protecting our most vulnerable. Remember, you might be someone's only chance. Don't look away. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay compassionate, and always, always check on your loved ones. At Virtuous Stories, we love you.